political ally, Governor J.B. Pritzker. Meanwhile, the Republican primary for the same seat was won by former State Party Chairman Don Tracy. The general election in this solidly Democratic state is expected to focus heavily on the cost of living and immigration reform. Matthew, those two issues, cost of living, immigration reform, how much of a factor do you think those two things are going to play moving towards November?
Well, those are big factors, and they could well lead to the United States, to the Republican Party losing control of Congress, or at least of the House of Representatives. It's not quite as clear. It doesn't look good for Republicans right now, but it seems more clear that they will lose the U.S. House of Representatives and not necessarily the United States Senate. So these are going to be important factors. Now, in the Illinois Senate race that Stratton, just Lieutenant Governor of Illinois, Juliana Stratton, she just won the Democratic nomination, the Democratic primary, and with the backing of the rich governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, an ardent progressive, a left-winger, and Juliana Stratton's message was fairly coarse and in your face. Basically, she said F, and you know what that F stands for. F Trump was basically her slogan during the campaign. Not too much different than Letitia James when she ran for and successfully became New York Attorney General a couple of years ago. She wants to hit out at Trump. She wants to hurt him. She wants to punish him, and she's trying to capitalize on anti-Trump sentiment, and that will go a long way for her in Illinois, where it is now that she has the Democratic primary under her belt. It is essentially a foregone conclusion that she will be the next U.S. senator from Illinois. The Republican doesn't have a chance. It's hard to think of a state in the United States that's more hostile to Republicans than Illinois. There aren't many of them. So Stratton will almost certainly be the next U.S. senator, and she's a black woman, and she would be the second black woman. Carol Moseley Braun a few years ago was a one-term senator and a black woman, a Democrat, who held the Senate seat. So it's not as demographically significant. They can't say she's going to be the first black woman to represent the state, but there aren't too many black senators. So in fact, I think there's only one right now from South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken, a Republican, and that in itself is going to be significant in terms of racialized balkanized politics in the United States, where groups fight each other, blacks versus whites and other ethnic groups and so on.
Okay, Matthew Vadum, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. Great pleasure to speak to you. We now turn on to some final updates for this hour, and Russia has dispatched 2 tankers to help Cuba. The Hong Kong flagged Seahorse, carrying around 27,000 tons of gas, is expected to arrive in the coming days after diverting course last month. The second tanker, the Russian Anatoly Kolodkin, is hauling between 725,000 and 728,000 barrels of oil and should reach Cuba in early April. This marks the first energy shipments to Cuba in 3 months. Fuel shortages have caused blackouts and disrupted basic services. The country faces one of its worst economic crises in decades. Moscow reaffirmed support for Havana despite US President Donald Trump claiming he would take Cuba. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says that Russia remains ready to provide all possible assistance and maintains close contact with Cuban authorities. Well, that is all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome. I'm Ruby Barlow and you are watching The World Report on Newsnext World. Let's take a look at some headlines of this hour. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said Israeli forces have killed Iran's intelligence minister Ismail Khatib. He added that he and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have authorized the military to target any senior Iranian official without seeking further approval. Hezbollah's Al-Manar TV said an Israeli strike in Beirut killed its political programs director Mohammad Shari and his wife as part of attacks that left at least 12 dead. The strikes hit multiple neighborhoods, with some carried out without warning as the conflict continues to escalate. Members of Iran's women's national football team returned from Australia after withdrawing their asylum requests, arriving at Istanbul airport via Oman and Kuala Lumpur. Footage showed the players walking through arrivals after leaving the Asian Cup in Australia. According to Turkey's defense ministry, NATO is deploying an additional Patriot missile system at Incirlik Air Base. The move comes just days after a third Iranian ballistic missile was shot down, adding to the existing Spanish Patriot system already stationed there. At least 4 explosions were reported over Erbil in Iraq, with air defences intercepting projectiles near areas hosting US consulate facilities and coalition troops. The incident comes as Iran-backed groups, including Qatar Hezbollah, step up attacks on US interests in Iraq. Saudi Arabia said it intercepted 2 drones targeting the diplomatic quarter in Riyadh amid ongoing Iran-linked attacks across the Gulf. Authorities also reported shooting down multiple drones in the eastern province and a ballistic missile near Prince Sultan Air Base, which hosts US forces. Singaporean Prime Minister Lawrence Wong is currently in Japan for 3 days to hold talks with Sanae Takaichi and strengthen bilateral ties. The visit aims to deepen cooperation as both countries mark 60 years of diplomatic relations and promote free trade and a rules-based order. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi will depart today for Washington to meet with US President Trump. They are also expected to advance a July agreement under which Japan will invest $550 billion in US strategic industries in exchange for reduced American tariffs on Japanese goods. Now, starting with a breaking story, in a huge blow to the US President Donald Trump, the US intelligence chief testified saying Iran made no effort to rebuild uranium enrichment after its capabilities were destroyed in the June 2025 US-Israeli attack, contradicting President Donald Trump's justifications for his ongoing war. Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, said in prepared testimony to the Senate that as a result of Operation Midnight Hammer that US undertook in June 2025, Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated. There has been no effort since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capability. Now, joining us live, we have Yossi Kupawasa, who is an Israeli intelligence and security expert, joining us from Tel Aviv. Yossi, thank you so much for joining us again on the show today. Now, we've got two contradictory statements coming out of the Trump administration there. What do you make of Tulsi Gabbard's comments?
Well, both are correct. The Iranians didn't make any effort to rebuild the enrichment facilities that were obliterated in June, because there's no way to recover them. The Fordow underground facility was severely damaged, and so was the case with the Natanz enrichment facility. And they didn't even try to rehabilitate the conversion facility in Isfahan that was also a target for the attacks in June. But what they did was that they were working on building another facility called PKEX that was supposed to host a factory that would develop new centrifuges that would be serving for enriching uranium. And they were refusing to give up the 450 kilograms of highly enriched uranium to 60%, which is very close to military level, that they were keeping in tunnels under a mountain in the Isfahan area. So this was the disagreement between the Americans and the Iranians. It was not that the Iranians already started to rebuild Natanz or Isfahan or Fordow. There's no way to do that for them. But they were planning on building something new, and were not ready to give up the 450 kilograms of uranium, and they were not ready to tell the Americans that they're going to give up the ambition to produce nuclear weapons. That was what the disagreement was all about. And President Trump and his envoys got the impression that the Iranians are refusing to accept this idea that they have to give up on enrichment of uranium. So it's not that they were in the midst of doing that, but they were not ready to give it up. And they insisted on having the capability to produce uranium and enriched uranium for the time being at the relatively low level, which is not so low, of 3.67%, and later on to higher levels. And they were ready to have limitations on their program only for 7 years, which is a mockery of the idea that they are not going to have a nuclear weapon. So it's not that we were in the midst of an effort of the Iranians to build nuclear weapons after what happened in June, but they were insisting on having the capability to do so in the future, and that's what caused the decision of the Americans to go to war.
Now, Yossi, this statement from Tulsi Gabbard perhaps contradicts some statements out from Donald Trump. Could this be the administration deal with these contradicting statements?
I don't know, but the statement don't conflict with any of what Trump said. Trump was the one who was repeatedly saying that in June we obliterated the Iranian nuclear project. So there's no contradiction between what he says and what Tulsi Gabbard is saying. They all agree that in June the enrichment facilities were obliterated. And this is really the case. Whether the Iranians had the intention to acquire nuclear weapons in the future, it's another issue, and I didn't manage to see what Tulsi Gabbard had to say about that. But if she said that they gave up their ambitions to produce nuclear weapons in the future, she might be wrong.
Yossi, please stay with us as we move to our next update. The US intelligence community reports that despite severe blows from the ongoing US-Israeli war, Iran's government remains intact. Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, told the Senate that the regime has been largely degraded due to targeted strikes on its leadership and military infrastructure. She warned that if Iran survives the conflict, it is likely to rebuild its military capabilities, highlighting both the resilience of the regime and its long-term capacity to recover from the attacks. This assessment contrasts with earlier claims that the strikes would decisively cripple Iran's power, emphasizing that while weakened, the Iranian government continues to function. Now, back to you, Yossi. Tulsi Gabbard there saying that the regime has been largely degraded but could survive this war. What's your take on those comments from her there in this hearing, and do you agree with her assessment?
Yes, I agree with her. I think the regime is still in place, even though it suffered very severe damage to its image and to its ability to function in the long run. But for the time being, they are in control of the country called Iran. And they lost most of their leaders, both politically, or many of the leaders, both politically and militarily. But they are still functioning, yes, this is the case. We see that every day. And this is why, right from the beginning, the idea was that it's going to take much longer in order to cause the damage that would threaten the stability of the regime and would pave the road for the people to take to the streets and remove the regime from power. It's going to still take quite a while. The original plan was 4 to 6 weeks. We are in the middle of week 3. So nobody expected such results by this time. We have to be patient and wait and keep degrading the capabilities of the regime. And anyhow, one thing that is very important is, I'm not sure if Tulsi Gabbard referred to that or not, is that the military capabilities were also degraded considerably, and both on the strategic level of military capabilities and on a more conventional level. And this has a great impact on their capability to keep fighting and to keep causing damage to Israel, to the Gulf states, to the United States, and to the rest of the world. Because the capability to produce nuclear weapons has been degraded considerably. The capability to produce ballistic missiles has been degraded even more so. And their air defenses are destroyed. And now there's a focus by the Americans on their naval capabilities. They say that by now they've already destroyed something like 120 ships. And I saw that they begin working on the ground to sea missiles that the Iranians have, especially in the vicinity of the Hormuz Straits. So a lot of damage is being inflicted on the Iranians, and they are much weaker than they were before, but they are still holding. And she's right. If the Iranians are going to remain, if this Iranian regime is going to remain in power after this war, they are definitely going to resume their activities in order to regain their military capabilities. That's obvious.
Mm-hmm. Yossi, please stay with us as we now move to our next story. Iran is maintaining its long-standing position against the development of nuclear weapons, even as the country has a new supreme leader. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi emphasizes that the new leader has not yet publicly shared his views and that previous fatwas issued by Ayatollah Khamenei prohibited weapons of mass destruction. Araghchi stresses that Iran's nuclear program remains for civilian purposes only, despite years of accusations from the US and Israel. He suggests that once the war ends, countries bordering the Gulf should draft a new protocol to ensure safe and regulated passage through the Strait of Hormuz in line with regional interests. He also acknowledges that Iranian strikes have impacted residential and commercial areas, attributing this to US forces relocating to urban centers. Let's listen into what Araghchi has said.
The doctrine has been a peaceful one, and we have always sought and still seek to exercise our rights to benefit from peaceful nuclear energy. A fatwa, as you know, depends on the person who issues it. I am not yet in a position to judge what the new leader's jurisprudential or political stance on this matter will be. My understanding is that it should not differ greatly from our previous policies, but we must wait until we become aware of his view. In my view, we need to design new arrangements for the Strait of Hormuz and the way ships pass through it in the future, after the war, so that peaceful navigation through this waterway can be permanently maintained under clear regulations, with consideration for Iran's interests and the...
Now, joining us live, we have Saul Sadka, who is a political commentator from Tel Aviv. Saul, thanks again for joining us again on the show. It's a pleasure to have you back. Now, in the comments there from Iragchi, he's said that the previous fatwas from the previous Supreme Leader prohibited the weapons of mass destruction. So what could we see if with this new Supreme Leader, if he does approve the construction of weapons of mass destruction? Of course, we've seen the development of Iran's nuclear program to a purity of 60% enriched in uranium. But what could a change in religious statements mean for this?
Well, for a nation to build nuclear weapons, they need two things. They need, first of all, the ability, the means of production, and they also need the will. So whether or not we take at face value the fatwas of the previous leader, who died a few weeks ago in unfortunate circumstances, that he didn't want to, and it wasn't just some kind of political trick. Even if we take those at face value and say that he didn't intend to build nuclear weapons, even though all his actions pointed to the fact that he did, well, he could have. So he had both, he didn't have the will, allegedly, but he did have the ability to do so within a very short time frame. But now the situation is reversed. They may or may not have the desire, but they certainly do not have the ability. Even if they could, in theory, have done so a few weeks ago, there's no way that they'll be able to go through the various complex processes, including digging up the lost uranium that's currently believed to be buried under the ruins of Isfahan and Fordo, and then turning that into nuclear weapons when American and Israeli jets are flying freely over their heads. So they may or may not have the desire under their new leader. Their new leader, by the way, has not been seen since he was appointed, except in cardboard cutout. So no one really knows what he thinks. And as soon as he is able to speak, from what we're seeing from the intent of the Americans and the Israelis, he will not be long for this world either. But time will tell.
Mm-hmm. Saul, please stay with us as we move to our next story. I'm going to move back to you now, Yossi. Can you expect to see any major differences in ideology, in leadership between this new Supreme Leader and the previous Supreme Leader? Of course, being son and father, they have that in common, but what differences could we see?
Well, they really have a lot in common. I don't expect major changes. And the fact is that, as Saul said, that the Iranians produced uranium enriched to 60%. Nobody does that unless he wants to produce nuclear weapons. So the fatwa is just a tool to conceal the real intentions, and we cannot take it as a real conviction that nuclear weapons are a bad thing to have, and all these nonsense that the Iranians occasionally say. It's they meant to have the capability to produce nuclear weapons. This is why they spent enormous amount of money in building the capabilities to produce nuclear weapons. And all this infrastructure was built only for one purpose, and they wanted to create the impression that they have also intention to use nuclear material for peaceful purposes, in order to justify their activity on the enrichment of uranium for military purposes. But this was the way they envisioned the way to having the nuclear weapons. And I don't think Mujtaba is anywhere different. And if there is a lesson that the Iranians learned from what happened now, is that if they had nuclear weapons, they would be much better protected and safer. So I think that we should worry that if this regime stays in power, they will try to find ways to produce nuclear weapons just like they did before, and even with greater zeal. That's what I'm worried about.
Mm-hmm. Yossi, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. It's been a pleasure to hear your insights. Now to our next story. NATO allies are intensifying discussions on how to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a critical waterway for global oil shipments. Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, said the allies are working collectively to find strategies and coordinated measures to ensure the Strait can function safely again. He made the remarks during a visit to Norway, where NATO's biennial drills, Cold Response, have been underway since March 9th. The exercises aim to enhance military readiness, and the discussions on the Strait highlight the Allies' focus on both regional security and global energy stability. Let's listen into what Rutte has said.
Well, let me first of all state and say that when it comes to Iran and the risk of Iran getting its hands on a nuclear capability or a ballistic missile capability, we have consistently said as NATO, collectively, that that cannot happen. So it is really crucial that that capability of the ballistic missiles, of the nuclear capability is severely degraded. When it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, I've been in contact with many allies. We all agree, of course, that Strait has to open up again. And what I know is that allies are working together, discussing how to do that. What is the best way to do it? They are working on that collectively to find a way forward.
Now, back to you, Saul. They're talking there about some solutions to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. What could these solutions be? We've heard comments over the past couple of days where Iran has said that payments made in Chinese yuan, that ships could possibly pass through the Strait if the payments for the oil are made in Chinese yuan. Could that be one of the solutions that NATO and the Europeans are looking at, or would it be of a military nature? And what's the likelihood of this, given that other allies of Israel and the United States have so far been reluctant to send military assets to the Strait of Hormuz?
Right, well, the other allies involved here are really the ones who are facing the consequences of the war that's happening. That's the real truth. The actual facts are that we have a dissonance between the people that are fighting the war, which is Israel and America, who are responsible for approximately 18% of global consumption of oil, and are both actually net exporters of petrochemicals. So they are shielded from any kind of shocks, although they might pay a little higher. Whereas the other nations in the world who might be more concerned, who are being asked to send ships to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, are India, and they are China, and they are Japan. So they're just going to have to wait and be patient. What's been done here is to take Iran off the board as a strategic threat to the rest of the world. This is to the detriment of many countries, including China, but it is to the benefit of many countries, including all the European Union nations, almost all of whom, except perhaps for Spain and Portugal, were within range of Iranian ballistic missiles and would have, in time, within a number of years, been under an Iranian nuclear threat if this had not have been done. So you have many people that have been the beneficiaries who have come along for the ride of American and Israeli actions. At the same time, there are other people who will be suffering some cost increases, some inflation as a result. The trick will be to get that strait open as fast as possible. The amount of material that America particularly has in the region is so vast that it's really hard to imagine they will not be able to find a way to simply blast away at any kind of Iranian attempts to keep the strait closed. There might need to be some kind of insurance situation guarantee set up, because even if there is a very small risk of a drone popping up and breaking through a protective barrier and hitting an oil tanker, the cost is vast. The value of an oil tanker with its contained fuel can exceed $100 million. So that has to be taken care of, and guarantees have to be put in place if the strait is to be opened. But the vast majority of the work will be done by America in that regard. My guess is this is a process that will take another few weeks or at most months, and then this will all be forgotten, and the Iranian regime will no longer have the ability to threaten the world in this way in future.
Mm-hmm. So perhaps the Americans taking the responsibility there. Saul, thank you so much for joining us on the show. And to both of our guests, please stay safe over there in Israel. Now, to our next story, the White House has indicated that the United States military has several strategic options ready regarding the Strait of Hormuz amid heightened tensions in the region. Officials say these measures are designed to ensure the free flow of shipping and energy supplies through the vital waterway, which has seen disruptions due to regional conflicts. Meanwhile, the US continues to monitor the situation closely, coordinating with allies to maintain stability and prevent any escalation that could impact global markets. Furthermore, authorities have emphasized that details of the military plans remain classified, but strategic preparedness is a key priority. Regardless, Washington stresses that ensuring security in the Strait of Hormuz remains a central focus amid ongoing regional uncertainty. Let's listen in to what the White House press secretary has said.
The president is going to continue to talk to our allies, both in Europe and also in the Gulf and Arab region. The United States military has a lot of capabilities, as you have seen play out over the last 18 days. They still do have tricks up their sleeve. I won't broadcast them for the media, but rest assured there is a plan. They're working on it. We have seen some progress with respect to that, but of course the president, again, continues to call on our allies to step up and do.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has stated that no convincing plan exists to achieve democratic change in Iran.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Iran says Israel targeted its South Pars gas field and responded with missile fire across the Gulf, including strikes towards Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Qatar Energy confirms significant damage at Ras Laffan, while Riyadh reports intercepting incoming projectiles aimed at strategic sites. The UAE has halted operations at its Habshan gas facility following an Iranian strike, while Saudi Arabia says multiple refining sites were targeted. Riyadh states confidence in Tehran has collapsed as the conflict spreads into vital energy sectors. Israel targets Iranian naval assets in Bandar Anzali alongside strikes on South Pars gas field, signaling a sharp escalation in the conflict. President Masoud Pezeshkian warns the actions could spark uncontrollable consequences with global repercussions. Iranian missile attacks have left 4 people dead in Tel Aviv and the occupied West Bank, according to reports. The incident underlines a worsening human toll, with non-combatant losses rising as fighting intensifies. Israel's military says it will continue targeted operations against senior Iranian figures after claiming to have killed Intelligence Minister Ismail Khatib. The announcement points to a broader strategy aimed at weakening Iran's leadership structure. Israel has intensified airstrikes on Beirut, killing at least 10 people and leveling a multi-story building near the city center. It also says crossings over the Litani River are being targeted to hinder Hezbollah mobility as the war deepens. In other news, Britain is launching a meningitis vaccination drive in southeast England after a deadly surge that has claimed 2 lives and left at least 20 infected. Officials say most cases involve young people and are connected to the Men-B variant. Heavy social media use is associated with falling well-being among young people, particularly girls in some English-speaking countries, a global study finds. Authorities are considering restrictions, with Australia already introducing a ban for under-16s. Those are your headlines for the hour. We start, of course, in the Middle East for our first update, and the first Palestinian fatalities of the ongoing Middle East war have been confirmed after 4 women were killed by falling shrapnel in the occupied West Bank. The deaths occurred in the town of Beit Awa near Hebron, where missile fragments struck a local beauty salon during an Iranian barrage aimed at Israel. Furthermore, 6 other individuals were reported injured, with some remaining in critical condition. Regardless of interception efforts by the Israeli military, the debris caused extensive damage to the residential area. Meanwhile, Palestinian civil defense teams have been deployed to inspect the craters and warn the public against approaching any remaining missile fragments. This incident marks a grim milestone as the conflict continues to widen following the joint US-Israeli strikes on Iran late last month. Furthermore, the Palestinian Red Crescent has confirmed that all those killed in the salon strike were women. Let's listen in to what one of the residents of the neighborhood had to say.
صالون ستات عندنا هان كان في صبايا تقريبا 9 صبايا في عندنا 3 شهداء لحد الآن وفي عندنا 7 إصابات يعني اللي بقوا موجودين جواتهم هم 10 فعليا. تقديراتكم اللي وقع شو اللي وقع؟ هو اللي برجحوا فيه الدفاع المدني والهندسي إنه شظايا. شظايا إيش؟
Joining us now is retired Major General Dr. Rajan Kochar, a senior strategic and international affairs expert, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us here on the broadcast. Pleasure to have you, of course. How did missile debris like this affect and cause such an impact in the occupied West Bank? We know that Israel has the Iron Dome across its territory, which is a form of air defense, a world-renowned air defense to protect it from attacks like this. But does this show that it can indeed be penetrated?
Good morning, Thomas. Yes, definitely this is a tragic incident because you see, whenever a missile is intercepted, the falling shrapnels are likely to cause direct strikes into these areas, and they are like sub-munitions themselves because they are also very, very deadly and dangerous, and this fragmentation of this debris can disperse over wide areas. So this is, you see, unfortunately, why this is significant is because it's the expansion of the battlefield, battle space effects. Even areas which are not directly targeted, and especially the West Bank has not been targeted by the Iranian missiles so far. It shows that these areas also become vulnerable now, and these interceptor engagements are at quite an altitude. So when they are at altitude and when these debris come to the ground level, they are bound to come at a very, very high velocity, and because of this velocity, wherever it is going to hit, it will be like a missile hitting only. I mean, the impact, though, of course, the warhead is not there, but these shrapnels are like bullets, and they have such high velocity that they can cause enormous damage, and the speed at which this missile gets intercepted is also significant because the speed is almost a supersonic speed. So you see at supersonic or it can be a hypersonic missile also. So both the scenarios are available to you, and this is something which is beyond the control of, I think, any country. Even if you have an Iron Dome, and if that Iron Dome strikes that missile in mid-air, it's impossible to control this debris, because these debris can go in any direction. They go into an urban area, they can go into a semi-urban area. So I think these are the vulnerabilities we are facing in this war.
And Dr. Kochar, how do you think Israel would fees against an aggressive Iran if the United States wasn't involved in this conflict?
See, this, as we are aware, Thomas, this conflict has been initiated on the basis of Israel only, and United States has joined in. And I'm sure that in case Israel was fighting in alone, the impact on Iran would not be, have been that much, because looking at the capabilities, because this is an attrition war, and we are fighting a war like Israel is fighting a war from a distance of 1,000 kilometers plus. So limitations of Israel in terms of munitions available, in terms of missiles available, in terms of interceptors available. I am actually given to understand now that Israel is almost run out of the interceptors, and that is why these missiles are creating a havoc in Israel. And Iran has unleashed new types of missiles now. I am given to understand that Sejal missile has also been used in strikes over Israel now, and it has caused a substantial damage in Israel, though those damage reports are not emanating from Israel due to a blanket ban on internet and other video recordings being sent outside Israel. But definitely, without the help of the United States, I don't think this kind of impact could have been made in this war.
Dr. Kochar, thank you very much. Do stay with us as we're turning over to our next story, where Iran's president has warned of uncontrollable consequences following attacks on the South Pars gas field, saying that harm to Iran's energy infrastructure could engulf the entire world. Parliament Speaker Mohammed Bagher Ghalibaf has added that an eye for an eye response is underway, signalling a new level of confrontation. The Revolutionary Guard also warned that if Iran's energy sector is attacked again, they will target oil and gas industries of their Gulf neighbors, which they consider American interests. They promised a response much more severe than previous strikes. Meanwhile, the Israeli army said it will continue its series of eliminations against Iranian officials. This comes after the killings of Intelligence Minister Esmail Khatib, Security Chief Ali Larijani, and Bazej Commander Gholamezra Soleimani. Brigadier General Efi Defrin stressed Israel will hunt down all senior regime officials without stopping. Joining us now on the broadcast to discuss the economic implications on how this conflict is having on the wider world is Dr. Seijiro Takeshita. He is a professor at the University of Shizuoka, joining us live from Tokyo. Thank you very much for joining us here on the broadcast. You're joining us from Japan, sir, a country, of course, very heavily dependent on imported energy. How exposed is it right now to this escalating conflict in the Gulf?
It's very much exposed. As you just reported, our reliance on oil is extremely high, especially after the 2011 Great Eastern Japan earthquake, where we had 30% of our electricity provided by nuclear, but that's turned to zero. Now we're slowly trying to basically revert back to about 20%, but still, it's very, very low. And our industry, the Japanese industry, as you know, precision semiconductors, all these things that you need a very stable energy, meaning that we can't rely to things like wind power or solar power, which means that we have to regress back into relying to oil. And surprisingly, Japan's dependency on Middle East is well over 90%. And back in the 80s, we used to say this is a very, very serious, national problem. So we have to reduce our level. But the fact is, it's increasing. And right now, according to some statistics, we're reaching almost 94% reliant ratio. So yes, this situation is really hitting Japan, or will be hitting Japan on the belly pretty soon.
And if the disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz intensify, what does that mean for Japan's oil and LNG supply in real terms?
Well, the prices will be shooting up, and as you know, we import 99.9% of oil, so obviously it's going to have a very negative implication to virtually, all industries. Right now, Japan is concerned about inflation because that's a word that we haven't seen in almost 3 decades. But we are, facing this problem. And that could be exacerbated very much by the weakening of the yen. And this is going to be the biggest headache for Ms. Takaichi and her regime, who has a very high popularity right now. But this could be one of the negative issues that could trip, further, I would say, placement of several policies. I mean, there will be a lot of frustration that will be felt.
And just earlier, Donald Trump asked for Japan's help when it came to breaking the Strait of Hormuz, a plan which Japan rejected. Is this a possible breakdown of Western cohesion? How serious is that risk, and what would it mean for global markets?
Well, actually, Japan has helped in the past in exactly the same place in 2014 during Abe administration. And we've also had a history of sweeping out the mines back in the Gulf War. So it's not that, we're not totally, involved. But that said, as you pointed out, having anger with the Mr. Trump is certainly going to be negative for Japan, considering that Japan is solely reliant very much on the I would say security measures from the United States. We have almost 130 U.S. bases here. And without U.S., obviously, we will be under extreme pressure from China. So it's very difficult to play this game right now for, Ms. Takaichi and her regime right now, because Japan is dependent. But under our constitution, we cannot support a direct help. And if you look at, as you pointed out, Western coalition, that's really starting to crumble because of, Mr. Trump's, I would say, sole decision-making process, which basically put a lot of Western leaders into question. So what you're seeing in Japan and the rest of the world is having a bilateral, relationship, which basically, in my opinion, strengthen the relative, I would say, power of unitarian states like that of China and Russia. So, in my opinion, things are going very negative in the long run as far as world trade is concerned.
And finally, how does this crisis reshape Japan's role within Asia, especially alongside the likes of China and South Korea?
Yeah. Well, what we have to do is clarify and strengthen the security measures on distribution. I think this time, this is what people are feeling very much. And for example, especially things like rare metals, Japan is already putting a lot of effort into creating relationship with Central Asian nations. 5 Central Asian nations like Kazakhstan. We're trying to basically unify a lot more coalition from that point of view, and rather than making a comprehensive type of coalition. So, Japan would have to start being a very important, I would say, piece of nucleus in this region in order to smoothen this, supply chain, because we don't want the Chinese to further increase their, influence, which had been a bit much of an alert signal during the COVID days.
Dr. Seiji Takeshita, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. It's a great pleasure to get your insight on these issues. We now turn over to some further updates, this time coming from the Trump administration directly, saying that it is considering deploying thousands of US troops to the Middle East. The move could provide additional options as the war in Iran enters its 3rd week. Options discussed include securing safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz and possibly deploying forces to Iran's Karg Island, the hub of its oil exports. Any ground operations would be highly risky due to Iran's missiles and drones. The administration has also discussed securing Iran's enriched uranium stockpiles. No decision has been made, but all options remain on the table. US forces continue targeting Iran's navy, missiles, drones, and defense industry. More than 7,800 strikes have been carried out as of now, damaging over 120 Iranian vessels. The Pentagon declined to comment on specific military plans. We move on once again, and French President Emmanuel Macron has posted on X saying that he spoke with the Emir of Qatar and the US President following strikes on gas facilities in Iran and in Qatar. Macron called for an immediate moratorium on attacks targeting civilian infrastructure, especially energy and water facilities. He stressed the need to protect civilian populations and ensure the security of energy supplies. The French president warned that avoiding military escalation is in the common interest, urging all parties to prioritize safety and stability in the region. Japan has rejected a US intelligence assessment that it has made a significant shift in its position on Taiwan ahead of a leaders' meeting. Tokyo said its basic judgment on how to determine an existential threat remains unchanged and fuels its long-standing security policy. Regardless of US analysis, Japanese officials say Japan has not altered how it would respond to a potential Chinese attack on Taiwan, emphasizing consistency in its defense stance. Meanwhile, the issue comes as Japan prepares for high-level talks with US leaders where regional security and China's assertiveness around Taiwan are expected to be central themes. Japan's position is rooted in its pacifist constitution and long-standing diplomatic practice, despite Moscow displaying growing military activity near the island. Joining us once again is Dr. Take Shitter to discuss this. What more can you tell us about the reports coming out of Japan today in terms of this? Dr. Take Shitter, can you hear? Okay, I believe we're having some audio issues there. Hopefully Dr. Take Shitter comes back to us. And Japan has rejected a US intelligence assessment that it's made a significant shift in its position ahead of Taiwan. Dr. Take Shitter joins us once again to discuss this. Why has Japan rejected this US intelligence assessment, saying that Tokyo has shifted its position on Taiwan ahead of this prominent leaders meeting?
Let me clarify this. Japan has not shifted its policy in regards to this survival threatening armed attack. And I'm extremely puzzled by this so-called US intelligence, report, as is, the government spokesman, Mr. Kimura, I think it was, who was also very much in, I would say, question mark about that remark. Because again, from that point of view, Japan's positioning has not changed an inch. We will be considering, if China attacks Taiwan, that would be a direct survival threatening armed attack. End of story. And that would be basically violating our coalition movement, and Japan would obviously have to make a move. And there is not an inch different in that point. And I think Ms. Takaichi, our Prime Minister, have also clarified that. So to be honest with you, I don't understand, the source or the background of this U.S. intelligence report that people are talking about.
Dr. Take Shitter, thank you so much for taking the time in joining us here on the broadcast. Great pleasure to speak to you. We now move over to Southeast Asia for our next story, and the Thai Parliament convened on Thursday to vote for a new Prime Minister. Incumbent Anutin Charnvirakul is expected to win enough support to remain in office. His Boom Jai Thai party won 191 seats and built a coalition with several partners. The Pheu Thai party, which placed third, joined the coalition, while the People's Party remains in opposition. Ornutin rose to power last September and calling early elections followed threats of a no-confidence vote. His popularity grew after taking a strong stance during the Thailand-Cambodia border conflict. The new Prime Minister will be formally appointed by King Maha Vajiralongkorn with a new cabinet to follow. The government faces immediate challenges, including higher energy prices and potential oil shortages. Additional uncertainty comes from a court review on whether last month's election could be invalidated. Joining us now is retired Major General Dr. Rajan Kochhar. Thank you very much for joining us once again and sticking with us. How important is this election for Thailand right now?
Thomas, I think extremely important because this vote is not a routine leadership transition. It's a stress test for the country's post-2023 political equilibrium, where electoral legitimacy, elite bargaining, and military-backed institutional constraints intersect. You would be aware since 2014 coup led by Prayut Chan-o-cha, Thailand has operated under a quasi-democratic system shaped by the military drafted 2017 constitution. And even after the election, the power formation has depended on less on popular mandate, on more on coalition engineering and Senate alignment. So I think in 2023 elections, we saw reformist forces surge, particularly the successor networks of the dissolved Move Forward party. And I feel that this particular vote represents a reformist urban-driven bloc, ideological linkage to the progressive platforms, and of course challenges are going to be there: military reforms, monarchy reforms, decentralization, structural barriers, Senate resistance, judicial scrutiny, as you mentioned, and so it is going to be a challenge for the new Prime Minister now, and the parliamentary arithmetics also will play an important role here, because here the PM is elected by 500 elected MPs and 250 Senate members, so which are largely military appointed. So we would see how this sort of scenario is going to emerge in Thailand, and especially when we have a very volatile border with Cambodia. As we have been discussing on your channel, there has been a frequent incursions on this border, and that would also be a great challenge for this present leader. And stability in Thailand is very, very critical as far as India is also concerned, because of our Act East policy, our maritime connectivity in the Bay of Bengal and Andaman corridor, and we would prefer a stable government here. And US is also playing a very important role in supporting the democratic forces in Thailand. So the bottom line is that it's relevant here now, Thailand stability and democracy returning. So it should be significant for the future of Thailand.
Dr. Kochhar, thank you so much. As always, it's a great pleasure to get your insight in that. We'll, of course, continue to bring you all the updates coming out of the Thai election as soon as we get them. We now finish this hour with some news from the world of medicine, where a revolutionary cancer immunotherapy that targets and eliminates entire tumours is being hailed as a major medical breakthrough by researchers at Rockefeller University. In a recent clinical trial, complete remission was achieved by patients after a redesigned drug was injected directly into their tumours. Remarkably, it was observed that the treatment not only destroyed the primary site, but also triggered the immune system to eliminate metastatic cancer in other parts of the body. Regardless of how small the study size, the therapy known as 2141V11 was injected directly into tumours, reducing toxicity compared to traditional intravenous drugs. Meanwhile, the treatment activated T cells, triggering systemic immune responses that destroyed uninjected tumours. Furthermore, in patients with advanced melanoma and breast cancer, multiple metastatic tumours disappeared after injecting only a single tumour. Researchers have emphasised that larger trials are needed, with nearly 200 patients currently enrolled to confirm these results. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Ruby Barlow and you are watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some headlines of this hour. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has said Israeli forces have killed Iran's intelligence minister Ismail Khatib. He added that he and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have authorized the military to target any senior Iranian official without seeking further approval. Hezbollah's Al-Manar TV said an Israeli strike in Beirut killed its political programs director Mohammad Shari and his wife, as part of attacks that left at least 12 dead. The strikes hit multiple neighbourhoods, with some carried out without warning, as the conflict continues to escalate. Members of Iran's women's national football team returned from Australia after withdrawing their asylum requests, arriving at Istanbul airport via Oman and Kuala Lumpur. Footage showed the players walking through arrivals after leaving the Asian Cup in Australia. According to Turkey's defense ministry, NATO is deploying an additional Patriot missile system at Incirlik Air Base. The move comes just days after a third Iranian ballistic missile was shot down, adding to the existing Spanish Patriot system already stationed there. At least 4 explosions were reported over Erbil, with air defences intercepting projectiles near areas hosting US consulate facilities and coalition troops. The incident comes as Iran-backed groups, including Qatar Hezbollah, step up attacks on US interests in Iraq. Saudi Arabia said it intercepted 2 drones targeting the diplomatic quarter in Riyadh amid ongoing Iran-linked attacks across the Gulf. Authorities also reported shooting down multiple drones in the eastern province and a ballistic missile near Prince Sultan Air Base, which hosts US forces. Singaporean Prime Minister Lawrence Wong is currently in Japan for 3 days to hold talks with Sanae Takaichi and strengthen bilateral ties. The visit aims to deepen cooperation as both countries mark 60 years of diplomatic relations and promote free trade and a rules-based order. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi will depart today for Washington to meet with US President Trump. They are also expected to advance a July agreement under which Japan will invest $550 billion in US strategic industries in exchange for reduced American tariffs on Japanese goods. Now to our first story. Iran has warned it could target oil and gas installations in the Gulf after attacks on its gas fields. Smoke was seen rising from energy infrastructure in Fujairah, indicating damage to key facilities. Multiple sites are flagged, including refineries and petrochemical complexes in Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Qatar. Qatar's foreign minister blamed Israel for the attacks near the South Pars gas field, calling them dangerous and irresponsible. Iran confirms that parts of its southern energy infrastructure were hit and accuses enemies of targeted strikes. The South Pars North Dome gas field, shared between Iran and Qatar, is the world's largest natural gas reserve, making this attack especially concerning. The strikes follow an escalation of military actions in the region, including attacks on commercial ships and closures in the Strait of Hormuz. Now joining us live, we have David K. Johnson, who is an American journalist and author, joining us from New York. David, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. What would it mean if there were attacks by Iran hitting the oil fields in the Gulf states?
Well, this would further disrupt oil shortages. Now, yesterday it was announced by the International Energy Agency they were going to release 400 million barrels of oil from strategic reserves around the world. 400 million barrels of oil sounds like a big number, but it's less than 4 days global consumption of oil. So with the Strait of Hormuz shut down, it might for a month hold off enormous price increases. And the Iranians know that the biggest lever they have is threatening both oil and liquefied natural gas operations with missiles, and they have missiles they can launch to against other countries in the Middle East as well as Israel.
Mm-hmm. Now, David, are you surprised at this statement coming out of Doha that the attacks on this field shared by Iran and Qatar were irresponsible, given that Doha is an ally of the United States?
Well, from the point of view of the Qataris, of course this is irresponsible. From the point of view of the Iranian, and particularly the Iranian military, which has been preparing for decades for what we're seeing now, an effort to overthrow the government by military force, they have looked at the assets they have and how they can least expensively and most effectively fight back. And they understand perfectly that the governments around them, all of which are Sunni dictatorships, whereas Tehran is Shiite, are going to line up with the U.S. against them, and they therefore regard them as reasonable targets in a military action.
Mm-hmm. And what could we see going forward with the oil and gas markets globally? Will we expect to see a recovery perhaps if this war was finished tomorrow, or will it take perhaps months for prices to return to normal?
Well, wars don't come with end dates. They're not like buying a package of cheese at a grocery store. Donald Trump has said this war will be over in a matter of days, but he says all sorts of things that are just utter nonsense. If we don't reopen the Strait of Hormuz by the end of this month, 2 weeks away, you're going to begin to see oil prices really go up. Some oil economists believe that if the war goes on for months and if there's a ground invasion by the US and Israel, that oil prices of $200 a barrel are entirely reasonable. And it will take a long time to restore. And when you shut down oil fields and liquefied natural gas fields, as the Qataris and others are doing to protect those assets still deep in the ground, that can damage the wells. It can damage future productivity from those wells. So those also concern the other governments in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. Now, just more broadly, how do you think that this war, this conflict, is affecting the reputation of the Gulf states as a place of luxury, of business, of tourism? Of course, before the war, it was quite a destination for Western expatriates, for migrant workers as well. But now we're seeing a massive impact on these Gulf states. Perhaps they're regretting allying themselves with the United States and having those military bases there, which is a target, of course, for the Iranians.
Well, I doubt these countries regret that they aligned themselves with the U.S. because they effectively get subsidized by the U.S. through providing military protection. In the particular case of Dubai, this is going to be a disaster for the commerce there, which is high-end, very high-profit commerce. People are simply not going to fly into Dubai to go shopping for a weekend or for a week. So this will be very damaging to those efforts to get off the oil economy and turn Dubai into a major center of commerce and merchandising to wealthy people. That can be recovered from in time, but it will, so long as there's any risk of missiles and drones being launched by the Iranians, Dubai is going to suffer and suffer seriously on an economic basis.
David, please stay with us as we move to our next story. Russia's foreign ministry has condemned a missile strike near Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant, stating it occurred just meters from an operating energy unit. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova warned that the strike posed risks to the lives of Russian citizens working at the facility. Regardless, Iran has informed the International Atomic Energy Agency that no damages or injuries occurred. Meanwhile, Russia has called on the United States and Israel to refrain from attacks on nuclear facilities, stressing the threat of a radiological and environmental catastrophe. Furthermore, spokeswoman Zakharova expects the International Atomic Energy Agency and the international community, including Gulf states, to condemn the incident and press for a ceasefire. However, Zakharova has also warned that continued hostilities could have unprecedented consequences throughout the Middle East, including in the nuclear sphere. Let's listen in to what the spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry has to say.
Мы решительно осуждаем безответственный, абсолютно неприемлемый ракетный удар, нанесенный по внутреннему периметру атомной электростанции Бушер в считанных метрах от действующего энергоблока. Мы неоднократно предупреждали Израиль и Соединенные Штаты Америки, продолжающие свою агрессивную военную кампанию против Исламской Республики, о категорической недопустимости создания угроз для жизни и здоровья остающихся на площадке многочисленных российских граждан, составляющих персонал атомной станции. Тель-Авив и Вашингтон должны отказаться от безрассудных атак на объекты ядерной инфраструктуры, что порождает реальные риски радиологической и экологической катастрофы в масштабах всего региона. Ожидаем недвусмысленного осуждения данного вопиющего инцидента со стороны МАГАТЭ, под чьими гарантиями находится АЭС Бушер. Мы рассчитываем на соответствующую реакцию всех ответственных и здравомыслящих членов международного сообщества и прежде всего государств Персидского залива, которые могут пострадать в первую очередь. Мы призываем вовлеченные в конфликт стороны одуматься и приложить усилия в целях скорейшего прекращения огня и деэскалации напряженности. Продолжение боевых действий чревато беспрецедентными негативными последствиями для всего Ближнего Востока, в том числе и в ядерной сфере, о чем мы неоднократно предупреждали.
Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz has stressed that Berlin would not support or participate in the US-Israel military conflict with Iran, reflecting a cautious European stance on the war. Merz said Germany lacks the legal mandate required for military involvement and emphasized that the conflict does not fall under NATO obligations. He noted that Germany was not consulted before the offensive actions by the United States and Israel against Iran and made it clear there is no intention to send troops or engage directly. Meanwhile, Berlin continues to work with European partners to address the escalating war and urges efforts to end hostilities and limit wider regional instability. The comments come as many European nations maintain a distance from direct military action, focusing instead on diplomacy and stability in the Middle East. Now, back to you, David. We've seen their comments that Germany was not consulted with this war. Do these comments surprise you, or is it an indication of perhaps the planning that has gone into this conflict? Perhaps a thought of their planning process and the broader ramifications for the region?
Planning by the U.S. going into this war. Benjamin Netanyahu's people told Trump, well, we're going to go attack Iran, and Trump, who makes seat-of-the-pants decisions and is appallingly ill-informed, he went along with this because of hubris, by and large, and his belief that he's all-powerful and can accomplish anything he wants. remember now that for the last year, Trump has been insulting the leaders of European countries, Canada, other U.S. allies. And so it shouldn't surprise anyone that they've said, hey, this is your war, pal, not ours. We're not having anything to do with it. That's a very smart move, I think, on their part to reduce the risk that they will be the subject of terrorist attacks, harrying them by forces friendly to the regime in Tehran.
And do you think that this war could have an effect on the relations there in Europe? Of course, the Ukraine-Russia war has been a bit overshadowed by this latest development in the Middle East.
Sorry, your voice cut out. I can't hear you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry there, David. Can you hear me now? Just there, David. Senator Warner warns that Gabbard's actions could be used to justify Trump's efforts to influence upcoming elections. He highlights concerns over the seizure of voting machines in Puerto Rico and potential misuse of national security powers. Officials say these moves raise questions about interference in domestic politics and the integrity of electoral process. Warner calls for close scrutiny of any actions that could affect voting procedures or election security. The issue adds to growing national debate over election safety and the role of political figures in oversight. Puerto Rico, of course, is a territory of the United States. It is not currently a state, and this is a polemic debate in America right now. Their elections do influence the developments in Washington. However, it remains to be seen what will come out of this developing story. Now, joining us live, we have again David K. Johnson. David, what's your thoughts on this development, this update coming out of Puerto Rico with these voting machines?
I'm sorry, it's not a story that I've seen this morning, and I don't know anything about the development, but just keep in mind the Trump administration maintains the 2020 election was fraudulently stolen from them, but in 60 court cases, they were unable to provide a single scintilla of evidence to support that. So be very cautious about anything that the U.S. Justice Department or the Trump administration says, because they're trying to peddle a lie that Joe Biden did not win the 2020 election, even though they have had numerous opportunities to present evidence and have never presented any evidence supporting that.
David, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It's a pleasure to have you on. Now to our next story. Pakistan's military has defended its recent airstrike in Kabul, saying the targeted site was being used for drone storage and military ordnance, not purely civilian purposes. In a statement, the military said the location housed drones, launch systems, and even Soviet-era Scud missiles, adding that footage showed secondary explosions, often cited as evidence of stored weapons. It also claimed the site was linked to the training of suicide bombers. Afghanistan's Interior Minister Sirajuddin Haqqani struck a more cautious tone, saying Kabul does not want war despite the heavy casualties reported from the strike. Speaking at a mass burial, he emphasized that Afghanistan prefers to resolve tensions through diplomacy. Now, joining us live, we have retired Major General A.K. Sewatch, who is a geostrategic expert, joining us from New Delhi. Now, Major General, we've got this new update coming out of the conflict there between Afghanistan and Pakistan, 400 dead. What's your thoughts on this update? How could it affect the region?
No denying the fact. As far as Pakistan is concerned, they claim that it was an intelligence-based operation, wherein they suspected that this was a site where missiles have been made or drones were being also constructed, and it was a typical TTP headquarters, and that's how they stuck there. But this is far from truth, because the fact is this was a rehabilitation camp where it was a hospital where the patients were there. More than 400 patients died, children died, the ladies became casualty. So as far as Pakistan saying that it was basically a TTP headquarter, or this was a place where the terrorists are being prepared for Fidain attack, I don't think it stands to logic. And it is against the international law. If you see a Geneva Convention, it speaks you cannot bombard a civilian area. So I think they need to be tried in international court, and they have to be penalized for what they have done. And thinking that Taliban will remain quiet, I think that is the biggest mistake Pakistan will make. You know, the point is, if you carry out the comparison between the two forces, obviously Pakistan has edge that they have air power and their air defense system is far stronger than Afghanistan. But what Afghanistan has, their advantage, if you carry out the SWOT analysis, strength, weakness, opportunity, and strength, is the guerrilla warfare. They are extremely good in guerrilla warfare, and they will strike on the Durand line. They already have captured in last time 15 to 20 posts of Pakistan. Almost 50 to 60 soldiers were killed. And this time again they will hit them hard. They are not going to take it like this. They are people who always believe in giving back on the same coin. So though the Afghans are saying that they want to sort out this problem by sitting across the table, since Pakistan is now hitting them and hitting them hard in those areas which has been a civilian area, they will. You see, that as far as Pakistan and Afghanistan is concerned, there are fault lines. And India knew it when on 15th August 21, Afghanistan, Taliban took over. There was a joyous movement in Pakistan. They thought they will get now strategic depth in their western sector. But India knew it that there are fault lines. These are three. One is that Afghanistan does not recognize Durand line. And the second thing, the Pashtun on either side want to join Afghanistan. They want to bring a Sharia law. And another very sticking point is that Afghanistan keeps on blaming Pakistan that it is giving shelter to TTP, the terrorists which are having bases there in Afghanistan, and they are striking in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. That also is far from truth. The majority of these terrorists have been prepared in Pakistan madrasas, and they are working and they are operating from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa itself. So the point today is that Pakistan trying to blame Taliban government of providing shelter to TTP, that is a militant group, may not be totally correct. So therefore the relationship are going from bad to worse. It is not the end of the story. Afghanistan will strike back and strike back with a might, and the strength they have is a guerrilla warfare, and they will strike it on Durand line, and they will create a heavy casualty. They will not accept these 400 innocent civilians being killed by the Pakistani strike, especially they use the air power, and they will remain quiet on that. They will strike back. They will respond with lot of might. So therefore, Pakistan should not take it, easy that Afghanistan is not going to hit back. They will hit back. And Pakistan is in today having a political instability, economic crisis, terrorism increasing manifold. Pakistan may slip into a civil war, and in case if the civil war take place in Pakistan, Pakistan can break into four, that is Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Balochistan, Sindh and Punjab. And POJ can Gilgit Pakistan, which is legally a part of India, illegally occupied by Pakistan, will certainly come back to India. I think this is the scenario which is now working out. So the way things are fanning out, I think Pakistan is having a big problem from all sides, and due to its own doing, the terrorism has been created by no one else, by Pakistan itself, by Pakistan madrasa. Pakistan dual policy of a good and bad terrorists which they send to India are good terrorists, Lashkar-e-Toba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and terrorists which hit them hard, TTP, are a bad terrorist. Unless they stop differentiating between good and bad terrorists, they can never win a war against the terrorism.
Major General, please stay with us as we move to our next breaking. So Pakistan has announced a temporary pause in hostilities with Afghanistan to mark the end of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Information Minister Ataullah Tara said the pause for Eid al-Fitr had been requested by brotherly Islamic countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey, for 5 days from Thursday until midnight on Monday. Now back to you, Major General. What do you make of this update from the story? We've got there a request from brotherly nations for a temporary pause in hostilities.
You know, that is very common in the sense that Ramadan month is there, and countries like Saudi, UAE, Oman, and these are all Sunni countries, and they have requested now both Pakistan and Afghanistan should have a truce, and they should give a pause for 5 days because holy month of Ramadan is going on. I think that is possible. It will hold on. But what thereafter? Thereafter, Afghanistan is not going to remain quiet. It will take a revenge of whatever has happened to it, because after all, 400 innocent civilians have been killed by the Pakistan. So things are not settled down so far. I don't think we can now expect a peaceful environment between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Things are going to deteriorate further and further because Pakistan is having a dual policy. It blames everyone else other than itself. It creates terrorism for everyone in the world. The top 100 terrorists in the world, 87 belong to Pakistan or they have roots in Pakistan. So let's see how things pan out. But to me, it looks like it's a temporary pause for 5 days. The fight will again start because Afghanistan will take revenge of their innocent which have been killed by Pakistan airstrike.
Major General, please stay with us as we move to our next story. A new US worldwide threat assessment has highlighted growing tensions around Taiwan, while suggesting that immediate conflict may not be imminent. The report described recent comments by Sanae Takaichi on Taiwan as a significant shift for a Japanese leader, signalling a more assertive stance from Japan on regional security issues. Tokyo has traditionally taken a cautious approach to Taiwan due to its sensitive ties with China. At the same time, the assessment said China still prefers to achieve unification with Taiwan without using force, indicating that diplomatic and economic pressure remain Beijing's primary tools. However, the report also noted that the US does not currently believe China is planning an invasion of Taiwan by 2027, offering a more measured outlook amid ongoing military build-ups and rising rhetoric in the region. Now back to you, Major General. Of course, we've seen a massive movement of US military assets from Asia into the Middle East with this war that they're currently engaging in with Iran. This report has indicated that China would perhaps not take military action on Taiwan until 2027, but could China possibly take advantage of this moment in time and take action on Taiwan?
You know, China always considered Taiwan as part of China. And majority of countries follow that one China policy, including India and US also, and majority of the country. And China want to take Taiwan, if want to take it, in case if it can be done peacefully, otherwise it will take it forcefully. And the point is that if you see Sana Takaichi, the Prime Minister of Japan last time said that in case the China try to take Taiwan with force, then they will also militarily intervene. So it's the first time when Japan is coming openly and saying that they will go all out to help out Taiwan in case Taiwan is attacked by China. And so is the South Korea. I think they are paying. But the mute question which arises now is the assessment which is given by US that as far as China is concerned, they are unlikely to take Taiwan by force before 2027. That can go for a 6 because the present scenario is very different in the world. Now the war which is taking place between US and Iran, and also Israel part of the same force supporting US. Now the question is that the resources are limited. As far as US is concerned, it has moved 2 aircraft carrier also from Indo-Pacific to Middle East. Now, as far as US is concerned, its total focus is toward Iran, and
Thank you so much for joining us now, Major General. Now we move to a breaking. Top Trump administration intelligence officials testify to the US Senate Intelligence Committee at their annual hearings, looking at worldwide threats to the United States. Hearings are expected to focus on largely security implications of the Iran war. Let's cut across. And that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines leading this hour. Israel has targeted Iran's South Pars gas field, which is shared with Qatar, in a major escalation, striking key energy infrastructure. The field is one of the world's largest gas reserves, and any damage risks disrupting global energy supplies. Israel says it has killed Iranian intelligence minister Ismail Khatib in a strike in Tehran. The claim, if confirmed, marks a significant blow to Iran's security leadership during the war. The United States has used deep penetrator bombs to strike Iranian missile sites near the Strait of Hormuz. The waterway is a critical global oil route, and the strikes aim to limit Iran's ability to threaten shipping. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes have leveled buildings in Beirut as the conflict with Hezbollah intensifies. The capital has seen repeated strikes as Israel targets what it says are militant positions. In the south of the country, the Israeli military has ordered residents south of the Zahrani River, including Tyre, to move north ahead of strikes. The IDF says it will target crossings along the Litani River to disrupt Hezbollah movement. Meanwhile, Iran continues missile attacks towards Israel, with a suburb of Tel Aviv reportedly hit. The strikes mark a direct escalation between the two countries, with civilian areas now impacted. Elsewhere, blasts have been reported in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar and Bahrain amid the widening conflict. The incidents suggest the war is spreading across the Gulf, raising fears of a broader regional escalation. Finally, in other news, Britain is launching a meningitis vaccination drive in southeast England after a deadly surge that has claimed 2 lives and left at least 20 infected. Officials say most cases involve young people and are connected to the Men-B variant. Those are your headlines for the hour. We start in the Gulf, where Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi has held separate phone calls with the foreign ministers of Turkey, Egypt and Pakistan. Araghchi discussed the US and Israel's military actions against Iran and their regional and global impacts. He urged the countries to remain vigilant and coordinate responses amid these threats, stressing the need for regional unity. In a separate conversation, Araghchi spoke with Sweden's Foreign Minister Maria Malmer Stenergard, who expressed dismay over Iran's execution of a Swedish citizen accused of spying for Israel. Araghchi called Sweden's support for the individual regrettable and defended Iran's actions. Iran's foreign ministry said these calls show Iran is focusing on its security and energy interests. They added Iran is keeping diplomatic contacts with key regional and global partners amid ongoing tensions. Iran continues to call for coordination among countries facing security threats. Joining us on the broadcast now to discuss the ongoing Middle East conflict is Ambassador Mahesh Sachdev, a former diplomat, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining us here on the broadcast. Of course, the war in the Middle East continues to escalate with that significant development today of Israel targeting Iran's South Pars gas field, which is one of the largest gas fields in the world, shared with Qatar. Abbas Araghchi there, the foreign minister of Iran, holding these separate calls with these foreign ministers from across the globe, including some regional players like Turkey, Egypt and Pakistan. When it comes to de-escalation, how much longer can we expect things to go up before they will come down? And of course, Iran's capabilities as well. They are showing no sign, really, of slowing down.
Unfortunately, that is true. The war is getting more and more intense and inclusive of civilian targeting, which is the bad news. As it is, the war has broken new grounds in terms of targeted assassinations of leadership, not only of political nature, but also of military nature. And oil and gas fields are being targeted now. They show that there is no intention of slowing the matters down. Iran, on its part, is bent upon continuing with the Strait of Hormuz being blocked, where 20% of the world's maritime-borne crude originates. And in retaliation to the South Pars field, Iran has bombed Ras Laffan, which is world's largest LNG facility in Qatar. These are very dangerous developments, and I think we would have to have some kind of self-restraint observed by the 3 players involved in this conflict before any talk of de-escalation or ceasefire can be taken up in a sort of a credible way. Now, the contacts with Egypt and Turkey and Pakistan that Foreign Minister Araghchi has made is partly to convey to the Gulf countries Iranian position and demands about them being avoiding hosting US military bases and so on. So let's see where does it take. I should also add here that the GCC foreign ministers are to meet in Riyadh today, and they are to take a collective stand on Iranian attacks, particularly on Ras Laffan, which is the biggest of its kind.
Yes.
Secondly, I should add here that these calls to Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt would also be aimed at Eid greetings, which is being observed in the Arab world today. Thank you.
Yes, and Ambassador, of course, the likes of countries that we've mentioned, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, these are just some of the countries that do really want to put an image of stability forward, a safe place for investment, and in some instances even in residence for foreign for foreign individuals, expatriates. In terms of investment, in terms of long-term effects of this conflict, how will this war fees with the likes of that foreign investment coming into those countries, especially considering this war is not slowing down, and it's in fact getting even larger?
I would like to reply to this question in two ways. Firstly, the issue of logistics is important. Much of the economic prosperity of these countries is based on export and import, mainly of hydrocarbons being exported and everything else being imported. Some of these places like Dubai and to some extent Abu Dhabi work as transit hub, importing goods from all over the world and then using their connections to difficult areas, less attended areas of markets, and re-exporting those goods to them. For example, Indian goods can't go to Pakistan, but through Dubai, they are exported to Pakistan and to Afghanistan, to Central Africa, and so on and so forth. So that is one part that is being hit by closure of Strait of Hormuz. Second part is more psychological, as you said. The brand equity of many of these countries and their concomitant prosperity depended on they being considered as oasis of peace and stability and economic rules-based markets and finances, and that led to its own wake. Now, that part is also being threatened because of the attacks on civil infrastructures and civilians being hurt. So that put together, both these axes are under strain, and these countries have tried to calm things down, continuously project the brand equity of calm and peaceful and economic stability, but it's becoming increasingly strenuous to project. If it continues, we will see a bit of impact beginning from after the Eid, with expatriates feeling uneasy, with tourism becoming rare. Dubai airport, which is world's largest, is now closed, effectively speaking. The Strait of Hormuz is closed, so Dubai port is no longer as active as it was, and extensive free zones, etc., are no longer free because of logistical issues.
Yes.
So all put together, there is a damage to the equity, but how long will it last is something that will depend on how extensive the damage the war inflicts on physical infrastructure and how long do the hostilities continue.
Okay. Ambassador, stay with us. We're turning over to our next update coming up now, where Iran's supreme leader Mojtaba Khomeini has vowed retribution for the killing of top security official Ali Larijani. Larijani, his son, his aide, and several council staff members were killed in a US-Israeli strike. Khomeini described Larijani as a highly influential figure with nearly 5 decades of service. He warned that the perpetrators will pay for their actions and that stronger determination will emerge. Lebanon's Hezbollah has also condemned the assassination, calling it cowardly. Israel has responded with heavy strikes and expanded its presence in southern Lebanon. The US-Israeli offensive has killed thousands since February, while Iran retaliates against US-allied regions and infrastructure. Ambassador, of course, Iran losing its leadership at quite an alarming rate. We do see replacements come in. However, now we have seen today as well the killing of Ismail Khatib, another high-ranking Iranian official. How much damage do these assassinations really do to the Iranian cause, and how might it affect how they make decisions going forward?
Putatively, the Iranian official and military structures are supposed to be resilient and are able to take such shocks, designed to have successions and continuation of policies at political and military level. But the ranks of the top hierarchy are being depleted fairly rapidly, and one would have to presume that the systems may not remain immune to such a vacuous condition at the top. Now, there are things that particularly jar is National Security Advisor, who would have been conscious of the security threats to himself as well as to the country at large, as well as the intelligence minister. They have been assassinated over past 48 hours. So apparently Israelis have pretty good intelligence network to get these two high value targets. This shows that Israel has deep penetration in the Iranian top hierarchy and is able to carry out assassination at its opportune moments. Now, the alternatives that are emerging to the leadership vacuum are people from Islamic Revolutionary Guards mainly, which are more hardliners. And these cadres may not have the requisite civilian military interface that is required to indulge in a diplomatic ramp off from the crisis. So in a way, while the system is under stress and the stress is unprecedented, we cannot just take it as a foregone conclusion that system would continue to be resilient and successors would continue to emerge and the same policy would be followed. There would be changes naturally as ranks get depleted.
Ambassador Sachdev, thank you so much for joining us here on the broadcast. Great pleasure to speak to you on these issues. We now move to another related development where Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi has arrived in Washington for high-stakes talks with US President Donald Trump amid the ongoing war between the US, Israel and Iran. Takaichi is expected to push for Middle East de-escalation while reaffirming Japan's economic and security ties with the United States. Regardless of earlier requests from Trump to send Japanese warships to the Strait of Hormuz, no ships are planned, though service and intelligence missions may follow a ceasefire. Japan's constitution and public opinion remain central to decisions. Furthermore, investment deals worth up to $63 billion are expected, targeting energy, critical minerals, semiconductors and rare earths, building on a $550 billion package agreed last year. Meanwhile, Japan will discuss joining the US Golden Dome missile defense system and accelerating long-range missile deployment, breaking from its post-war self-defense principle. Japan also seeks to diversify oil suppliers, including Alaska, investments and stockpiles, while strengthening ties with Iran to ensure energy security. Joining us to discuss this is Major General Sudhakar G, a senior strategic and international affairs expert. He joins us live from Jaipur. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. It's a great pleasure to speak to you. The two counterparts talking today or tomorrow after Sanai Takaichi's first visit to Washington. But in terms of this conflict, there was huge discussions about the previous Venezuelan operation done by the United States and how China would look at that. How do you think Beijing is looking at this conflict? And do you think that Japan will raise said issues that Beijing will raise, especially after the renewed tensions between Tokyo and China?
Yeah, firstly, good morning, Thomas. Thank you for inviting me. My take on the whole issue in relation to your question is, the entire world order is in huge churn, and there is nowhere you can see or feel that sense of peace and tranquility anywhere in the world. So under these circumstances, and one small issue is related to not only big issues, but also to the non-issues. So anything happening, whether it is Middle East or South China Sea or elsewhere in the world, China being a major stakeholder, being is a aspiring global power, will come up willy-nilly, because whether we accept or not, Takaichi is a very straightforward, upfront political leader. She is the first prime minister to have actually called out that any action taken by China against Taiwan will pose a threat against the operational preparedness of Japan. So therefore they will be left with no option but to take defensive measure, which actually irked it created a very serious flutter in China, if you recall. So therefore, under these circumstances, the subject is going to be discussed for sure, and because China is not in terms of only security imperative, there are rare earth element on which China sits tight and controls it, by a weaponized method, which is impacting the automobile industry of Japan. And third and most important thing is the fourth aircraft carrier of China is going to be ready very soon. They will be breaking through the first chain of island and threatening the second chain of island, that is Guam. Guam is located on the second chain of island.
Yes.
So once they go across the first chain of island, that becomes a trigger. That is a red line as far as Japan is concerned. So all these apprehensions, in addition to Middle East, certainly going to be raised by her, plus the points that you have raised in your preamble. Back to you, Thomas.
In terms of Donald Trump's request for the Japanese to send naval ships towards the Strait of Hormuz to help the Americans block it, Donald Trump raised dismay at other actors, including the United Kingdom, for example, and not getting involved in that operation. However, we haven't seen that today. We've seen all smiles seemingly, as well as new investment announced by Japan. Why do you think that is?
Thomas, this has actually become very ridiculous. Donald Trump himself is not prepared to send its vessels, naval vessels, to clear the Strait of Hormuz, and it has been demanding, or it is asking, the allies and their resources for the same. Now, when you are not prepared to put your resources for clearance of Strait of Hormuz, how can the resources from your allies, friends, and others can actually come into the Strait of Hormuz to give escort or clear the mines which have been laid underwater? So therefore, there is definitely not a case of ambiguity, but it is a playing safe mechanism which is playing out from Donald Trump's side. That is because the cost factor. Let me just give a small example. A mine which is subsurface underwater, a cost of a mine is $500. Now it has got the potential. If you, let's say, send the vessel which is coming from Japan, that vessel, let's call it as a destroyer. A destroyer anywhere in the world, the bottom line cost will be 4 billion. It can go beyond 4 billion to 16, 18 billion, depending on the armaments it has and the aircrafts and other machinery. So bottom line cost is 4 billion. One mine which is posing a threat to its life is $500. So $500 mine, knocking off a ship in middle of that 30 or 33 kilometer wide the channel is going to be a great loss of face, be it Japan or USA or any country. Will any country, mindful of these kind of potential dangers, venture into the Strait of Hormuz? Unless they venture into Strait of Hormuz, what kind of protection or escort or clearance of the mines will they do? These are the questions, tactical questions, which are playing in the minds, and they are not speaking out. And in fact, why the American Navy has taken a back foot is perhaps they have started realizing that the rate at which the interceptors, Tomahawk missiles, and the Patriot missiles are running out from the stock, building them that and recouping the expenditure is going to take them 3 to 5 years. So let's say China is going for reunification of Taiwan by end of this year. Will they have enough of stock to give the bare minimum support to Taiwan, which they have given a tacit understanding or assurance? These are the kind of, realistic questions which will come up in the minds of Donald Trump, whether it comes up in his mind or not. But I hope and pray that his advisors do think on these lines. Otherwise, they are actually moving from, frying pan to fire. They are in great danger. It will do them good if they introspect, carry out analysis, listen to each other, and formulate.
Major General Sudhakar Ji, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. It's always a great pleasure to speak to you. We now move on, and unidentified drones have been spotted over bases housing US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. The drones were detected flying above the Fort McNair Army Base in Washington. Officials have not yet determined the origin of the drones and reportedly considered relocating the two, though no moves have been made. The sightings come amid a heightened US alert linked to the ongoing war in the Middle East. Reports say investigation into drones continues with heightened security measures at Fort McNair, while authorities monitor airspace and assess potential threats to top US officials. More coming out of the States coming up next, and Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said that he will not leave the central bank until a Justice Department criminal investigation is resolved. This stance could hinder President Trump's plans to install a Fed chair favorable to lower interest rates. Powell also indicated that he may stay at the Fed even after his term as chair ends until his successor, Kevin Warsh, is confirmed. The Senate confirmation is currently in limbo, with a Republican senator vowing to block Warsh's nomination while the probe continues. Powell said that he will make future decisions based on what he believes is best for the Fed and the American people. His board seat remains secure until 2028, and historically, Fed chairs rarely stay after their leadership term ends. The White House has not commented on the situation. Well, that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Matsuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the headlines of this hour. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has said Israeli forces have killed Iran's intelligence minister Esmail Khatib. He has added that he and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have authorized the military to target any senior Iranian official without seeking further approval. Meanwhile, Hezbollah's Al-Manar TV has said an Israeli strike in Beirut killed its political programs Director Mohammad Sheri and his wife as part of attacks that has left at least 12 dead. The strikes hit multiple neighborhoods, with some carried out without warning as the conflict continues to escalate. Members of Iran's women's national football team have returned from Australia after withdrawing their asylum requests. Arriving at Istanbul airport via Oman and Kuala Lumpur, footage showed the players walking through arrivals after leaving the Asian Cup in Australia. According to Turkey's defense ministry, NATO is deploying an additional Patriot missile system at airbase. The move comes just days after a third Iranian ballistic missile was shot down, adding to the existing Spanish Patriot system already stationed there. At least 4 explosions were reported over Erbil, with air defenses intercepting projectiles near areas hosting U.S. consulate facilities and coalition troops. The incident comes as Iran-backed groups including Kataib Hezbollah step up attacks on U.S. interests in Iraq. Saudi Arabia said it intercepted 2 drones targeting the diplomatic quarter in Riyadh amid ongoing Iran-linked attacks across the Gulf. Authorities also reported shooting down multiple drones in the eastern province and a ballistic missile near Prince Sultan Air Base, which hosts U.S. forces. President Trump confirms that NATO members are refusing to get directly involved in military strikes against Iran. The alliance prefers diplomatic channels despite heavy pressure from Washington to join the offensive. President Trump demands Japanese warships police the Strait of Hormuz as Iranian attacks choke global oil flows. Prime Minister Takaichi battles pacifist laws to protect energy lifelines without fracasting the U.S. alliance. Now, for this hour, we start with a funeral that's taking place in Tehran, where crowds have gathered at Engelab, or the Revolution Square, to mourn senior Iranian officials and naval personnel killed in recent attacks. The ceremony began at 1:30 p.m. local time and is expected to proceed towards the Martyrs' Memorial, according to official statements. Among those being honored is Ali Larijani, a powerful figure who served as Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council. He rose in influence following the reported killing of Ali Khamenei earlier in the conflict. Also killed is Gholam Reza Soleimani, who led the Basij paramilitary force under Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Several sailors killed in an incident involving an Iranian naval vessel off of Sri Lanka are also being commemorated. Iranian authorities say the deceased played key roles in maintaining internal security, including overseeing a crackdown on anti-government protests earlier this year. Those protests had posed one of the most serious challenges to Iran's political system in decades. Separately, Israel Katz, the defense minister of Israel, said that Israel has expanded its military rules of engagement, authorizing forces to directly target senior Iranian officials without seeking further political approval. In a statement, Katz has said the decision was taken jointly with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, giving the Israel Defense Forces operational freedom once intelligence confirms a viable target. He has
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reforms, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines leading this hour. Iran says Israel targeted its South Pars gas field and responded with missile fire across the Gulf, including strikes towards Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Qatar Energy confirms significant damage at Ras Laffan, while Riyadh reports intercepting incoming projectiles aimed at strategic sites. The UAE has halted operations at its Habshan gas facility following an Iranian strike, while Saudi Arabia says multiple refining sites were targeted. Riyadh states confidence in Tehran has collapsed and the conflict spreads into vital energy networks. Israel's targeted an Iranian naval assets in Bandar Anzali alongside strikes on South Pars gas field, signaling a sharp escalation. President Masoud Pezeshkian warns the actions could spark uncontrollable consequences with global repercussions. Iranian missile attacks have left 4 people dead in Tel Aviv and the occupied West Bank, according to reports. The incident underlines a worsening human toll, with non-combatant losses rising as fighting intensifies. Israel's military says it will continue targeted operations against senior Iranian figures after claiming to have killed Intelligence Minister Ismail Khatib. The announcement points to a broader strategy aimed at weakening Iran's leadership structure. Meanwhile, Israel intensifies airstrikes on Beirut, killing at least 10 people and leveling a multi-story building near the city center. It also says crossings over the Litani River are being targeted to hinder Hezbollah mobility as the war deepens. In other news in Europe, Britain is launching a meningitis vaccination drive in southeast England after a deadly surge that has claimed 2 lives and left at least 20 infected. Officials say most cases involve young people and are connected to the Men-B variant. Heavy social media use is associated with falling well-being among young people, particularly girls, in some English-speaking countries, a global study has found. Authorities are considering restrictions, with Australia already introducing a ban for under-16s. Those are our headlines for the hour, but we start, of course, with the Middle East war, where extensive damage is being reported at Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city tonight following a series of retaliatory missile strikes launched by Iran. This follows an earlier attack on Iran's South Pars gas field, for which Israel has been blamed. Furthermore, massive fires have seen illuminating the skyline of the capital of Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, after ballistic missiles and drones were intercepted over the region. Regardless of interception efforts by Saudi and Emirati forces, the operations at the UAE's Habshan gas facility have been suspended. Meanwhile, urgent evacuation orders have been issued by Iran's Revolutionary Guards for major energy hubs across the Gulf, including the Jubail complex and Ras Laffan refinery. The impact is already being felt globally as oil prices have leapt to nearly $110 a barrel. It is feared by analysts that these strikes on the world's largest gas reservoir could keep critical LNG supplies offline well into the month of May. Some further updates for you. US President Donald Trump has posted on Truth Social saying that Israel struck a section of Iran's South Pars gas field out of anger over regional events. He clarified that the United States knew nothing about this attack and that Qatar had no involvement or prior knowledge. The president added that Iran, unaware of the facts, struck part of Qatar's LNG facility unjustly. He warned that no further Israeli attacks will occur on South Pars unless Iran targets Qatar again. Trump said that in such a case, the US, with or without Israel's help, would strike South Pars with unprecedented force. He stressed he does not want to authorize such levels of destruction due to long-term consequences for Iran, but promised to act if Qatar's facilities are hit again. Joining us to discuss updates coming out of the world's most volatile region is Collins Chong-Yu Keat, a foreign affairs, security and strategy analyst, joining us live from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much, Collins, for taking the time in joining us. Great pleasure. Let's discuss the ramifications of this. We're now seeing oil fields targeted by both sides, allegedly starting with an alleged Israeli strike on South Pars oil field in Iran and led to a retaliation from the Iranians directed towards Qatar. What more can you tell me about this, and what effects will this have long term when it comes to this conflict?
Well, certainly we have seen how Iran is trying to exploit the cost asymmetry gap in escalating the cost of energy, as well as also upsetting the global energy structure. And this is essentially the narrative has been to tell the US that you can target our oil facilities, our infrastructure, our missile and drone bases, but of course also the cost will be at the expense of regional and global energy system. And the Gulf nations have been targeted deeper. Retaliatory responses by Iran have always been it is like a tit for tat move to ensure that every move, every target, every strike that they have on any Iranian bases would then see these sustained ramifications on the regional energy infrastructure. And now that we have seen this is being exploited deeper in this the whole notion of this asymmetric warfare, and of course Gulf being the center of the global energy system, and this has also shifted the theater of conflict from being confined mainly on the targets on Iranian soil, and to expand it to of course also for now is at the regional level in terms of targeting Gulf nations, Qatar, and but the ramifications, the costs, the escalations, at the global front will be immense, and Iran is cognizant of this fact that although it has not matched the conventional capacity of the US, it still has this geographical advantage. It still has this, the leverage on controlling the stakes of this high-stake battle, on energy, and this is essentially the factor that's still being used effectively by Tehran, and it remains to be seen how the retaliatory measures by these Gulf nations, including especially by Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And for now, we have seen, a much more restrained and strategic constraint by these nations. But moving forward for the next couple of weeks, this will be of great importance in terms of the urgency as to how this will, shape in terms of the consequences for the region as well as for the energy, sector throughout the world. Thomas.
And Donald Trump's statements seemingly signifying that Israel and the United States haven't been as in close coordination as previously thought. Donald Trump says the US had no prior knowledge of this strike on Pars. Does that signal that both countries are coming from different angles here?
Well, we can imply some different perspectives here, and of course also it has to be seen from the perspective of how the exit plan or exit strategy of the US will be, and there have been also prior contacts between the team from the US, by Wickoff, as well as in meeting with Abbas, and it remains to be seen how detached and how the US is trying to also have its own kind of measures here in terms of how this will move forward, and any moves or efforts or unilateral moves by Israel would then be seen as being in a different capacity on Israel's own intent, and of course it's different from what the US is trying to do here, and of course trying to send a different signal to Iran that this cannot be associated with the real intent of the US, and we have seen how these different responses also reflect these possibly different pathways as to how each will see the exit game here for Iran, and for now we have seen how Iran will continue to sustain these measures and to use these selective denial weapons, using Strait of Hormuz, using this targeting of key energy infrastructure to raise the stakes and to get further pressure from the global front on both Israel and the US.
Okay, Collins, do stay with us. We're turning over to our next story, to one of the focal points of this conflict. And according to maritime and trade data, around 90 ships, including oil tankers, have managed to cross the Strait of Hormuz despite the conflict. Most global oil and gas traffic has been halted since early March, yet Iran has still exported over 16 million barrels of oil. Many of these vessels are dark transits moving under the radar to evade Western sanctions, likely with Iranian connections. China remains Iran's largest buyer, while crude prices spiked above $100 a barrel, prompting President Trump to pressure allies to send warships and reopen the strait. Collins Chong-Yu-Keat joins us once again on this story. Despite the conflict, nearly 90 of these ships have crossed the strait. Is the disruption less severe than markets initially feared?
Well, as I've stated, I'm quite optimistic on on how this will turn out, and of course, what Iran is trying to signal here is, there's this mutual vulnerability doctrine, and you can strike out nuclear gas facilities, but also we can collapse your entire energy system. And this creates this kind of notion of deterrence through shared vulnerability. And of course, also, this whole risk of systemic collapse. And but as we have seen how President Trump will want this to be decided in the next couple of weeks, and of course Iran will continue to escalate through the leverage on the key choke points on Strait of Hormuz, and as well as multiple target strikes on ports, on pipelines, as he has done before. But of course, the US is also now caught in this strategic dilemma of whether to escalate militarily or to continue to contain and absorb at the expense of its own loss of credibility, and of course global economic damage also. But as I've stated, President Trump is right when he has argued that Strait of Hormuz is extremely important to most of these Asian nations, including of course Japan, China, South Korea, and that and of course if there's an oil price increase, then the US stands to benefit, being the number one energy producer, and of course Strait of Hormuz, and of course by raising these stakes and by creating this greater pressure on China and Japan and other allies to have this shared burden of having this and in managing the Strait of Hormuz. What President Trump is trying to say is that we have done the heavy lifting, and now it's your obligations to continue to protect these pathways, and that and the US stands to gain in terms of other factors. But all these nations will then they no longer have the right to depend on the US solely and to use the US as a piggyback to ride on these safety measures on the Strait of Hormuz. So but it depends on how President Trump would like to see how this will turn out in the next couple of weeks, Thomas.
Colin Strong-Ukit, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your insight there. It was a great pleasure to talk to you. But we now are moving over to further updates, but this time coming out of the United States directly, where the National Security Advisor, Tulsi Gabbard, told the Senate, the intelligence panel, that US strikes on Iran have been a strategic success. She said the Iranian government has been significantly degraded, but still remains intact. Gabbard avoided clarifying whether Iran posed an imminent threat before the strikes, leaving questions unanswered. Lawmakers pressed her and other top security officials on the intelligence community's assessment of global threats. Gabbard told the Senate Intelligence Panel that US strikes on Iran have been a strategic success. She said the Iranian government has been degraded but still appears intact. Gabbard avoided clarifying whether Iran posed an imminent threat before the strikes. She warned that Iran and its proxies remain capable of attacking US and allied interests. Tulsi Gabbard also identified Russia, China, North Korea, Iran and Pakistan as the most significant nuclear threats to the United States. Gabbard said these countries are developing advanced missile systems, both nuclear and conventional, that could reach US soil. She stated that China and Russia are working on delivery systems that could penetrate or bypass US missile defenses. She warned Pakistan's long-range ballistic missile development could also include ICBMs, capable of striking the US. Gabbard highlighted Al-Qaeda and ISIS as continuing threats active across Africa, the Middle East and South Asia. Gabbard contradicted President Donald Trump, saying the nuclear enrichment program was destroyed in 2025 and has not been rebuilt. Joining us now on this is Matthew Vadum, an author and journalist joining us live from Washington, D.C. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us here. Tulsi Gabbard seemingly walking a tightrope, defending the success of the US strikes on Iran while avoiding the very question that justifies them, which is, of course, whether Iran posed an immediate threat in the first place to the United States. This isn't the first time we have seen Tulsi Gabbard either contradict or plain and simply undermine President Donald Trump's statements previously. What more do you have to say on this sort of muddy messaging coming from the National Security Advisor? Some sort of pattern when it comes to her relationship identifying Iran, seemingly.
Well, in a war, the main players on the U.S. side often don't agree exactly about how the war is going. So it's not surprising that they have been emphasizing different things. The Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, and President Donald Trump have said that the U.S. is winning the, what is it now, 3-week-old conflict, and so on. But Gabbard said today in a congressional oversight hearing that the government of Iran although it has been degraded, it still remains intact. It is still governing, which is contrary to some reports that I've read where, the president, Pezeshkian, was saying that, that he doesn't have control of the governmental apparatus in Iran. So, in the fog of war, it's often difficult to know exactly what is happening on the ground. But Tulsi Gabbard admitted today that the government of Iran still is intact, and still continues to pose a threat to the United States. It's still putting up a fight in the Strait of Hormuz and in other locales, and it remains dangerous. And they haven't finished off Iran. They haven't finished off the mullahs just yet.
Do you truly think that Iran posed a threat to the United States? Of course, the narrative has changed pretty frequently where we're learning about why America entered this war. It has turned from nuclear enrichment, contradictory statements there once again, to the fact that Iran was developing ballistic missiles that could possibly reach some US territories. Do you really think this war was in the interest of the United States?
I think the war was and continues to be in the interest of the United States. One can argue about how imminent the threat Iran posed to the United States. Iran has been at war effectively with the United States for 47 years now, since the Iranian revolutionaries seized the American hostages at the U.S. Embassy in 1979. So, and they've been attacking, using their forces to launch terrorist attacks that have killed Americans ever since then. So, I think that focusing just on the idea of an imminent threat, as if there's a bomb somewhere that's just waiting to blow up United States territory, is something that opponents of the war are going to focus on, whereas President Trump took a broader perspective, and that is that Iran, regardless of whether there is an imminent threat or not, continues to be a threat, and that the United States doesn't have to wait until it's got a nuclear missile from Iran pointed at it before it chooses to act. He is attempting to neutralize a threat that has been there for almost 50 years, although various presidential administrations in the United States have downplayed the danger that Iran poses, particularly Trump's predecessor, Joe Biden, and Barack Obama were much more conciliatory towards Iran, whereas Trump has decided to take a hard line against Iran. And most people, at least most Republicans in the U.S., according to recent polling, overwhelmingly support the war goals. The U.S. public in general had initially not been supportive of the war, and now support is still not overwhelming, but it is climbing, and the people are beginning to see the wisdom of the war. Now, if high gasoline prices at the gas station continue, then their enthusiasm for the war may dissipate, because
Yes.
American people don't like wars, especially ones that last a long time. And if they feel pain in their wallets and their pocketbooks, they may begin to reconsider their somewhat tentative support for Trump's war in Iran.
Okay, Matthew, do stay with us. We're turning over to our next story.
All right.
Coming out of the United States once again, and the former National Counterterrorism Center Director Joe Kent is now under FBI investigation for allegedly leaking classified information. The FBI probe, which according to sources began before his resignation this week, is focusing on whether Kent inappropriately shared sensitive intelligence. Kent stepped down as the top US security official in protest of the war in Iran, criticizing the administration's decision and asserting that Iran posed no imminent threat. Regardless of his resignation, multiple sources say the FBI is examining potential unauthorized disclosures of secret material. The Bureau has declined to comment publicly on the investigation. Matthew joins us once again. What more can you tell us about Joe Kent, and how serious is it when a former counterterrorism chief is investigated and for leaking classified intelligence?
Well, it's extremely serious that that Joe Kent, who was the head of the National Counterterrorism Office, he is a key figure in combating terrorism, and if he's being investigated for leaks, that is a serious problem. Joe Kent, appears to be. I'm not sure why President Trump decided to appoint him to that post, or maybe it was Tulsi Gabbard who did it. But this is a fairly unstable, inconsistent fellow that had voted for the socialist democratic socialist Bernie Sanders reportedly in the past, and has done a major ideological flip-flop. Just a year, they dug up old statements that he made just a year ago, saying that Iran was a danger and that he hoped President Trump took swift action against Iran. And now, all of a sudden, he doesn't agree with what he said, just a year ago. And so, he's a very strange individual. And I'm not surprised that he's being investigated. I don't know if he's guilty or not of leaking.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report here on NewsX World. Let's dive into the top headlines leading this hour. Israel has targeted Iran's South Pars gas field, which is shared with Qatar, in a major escalation, striking key energy infrastructure. The field is one of the world's largest gas reserves, and any damage risks disrupting global energy supplies. Israel says it has killed Iranian intelligence minister Esmail Khatib in a strike in Tehran. The claim, if confirmed, marks a significant blow to Iran's security leadership during the war. Elsewhere, the United States has used deep penetrator bombs to strike Iranian missile sites near the Strait of Hormuz. The waterway is a critical global oil route, and the strikes aim to limit Iran's ability to threaten shipping. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes have leveled buildings in Beirut as the conflict with Hezbollah intensifies. The capital has seen repeated strikes as Israel targets what it says are militant positions. Elsewhere, the Israeli military has ordered residents south of the Zirani River, including Tyre, to move north ahead of strikes. The IDF says it will target crossings along the Litani River also to disrupt Hezbollah movement. Iran continues missile attacks towards Israel, with a suburb of Tel Aviv reportedly hit. The strikes marks a direct escalation between the two countries, with civilian areas now impacted. Blasts have been reported in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar and Bahrain amid the widening conflict. The incidents suggest the war is spreading across the Gulf, raising fears of a broader regional escalation. Now, in other news, Britain is launching a meningitis vaccination drive in southeast England after a deadly surge that has claimed 2 lives so far and left 20 infected. Officials say most cases involve young people and are connected to the Men-B variant. Those are your top headlines this hour, but we start in Southeast Asia. And Thailand's Ornotin Shan has been elected as the Prime Minister in the parliamentary vote. His Bum Jai Thai party won 191 seats and built a coalition with several partners. The Pheu Thai party, which placed third, joined the coalition, while People's Party remains in opposition. Ornotin rose to power last September, and calling early elections followed threats of a no-confidence vote. His popularity grew after taking a strong stance during the Thailand-Cambodia border conflict. We'll continue to bring you more coming out of Thailand as soon as we get the information. But now, of course, over to the Middle East. And according to Lebanon's health ministry, Israeli attacks have killed 968 people since Hezbollah fired at Israel on the 2nd of March. The toll includes 77 women, 116 children and 40 health workers, while an additional 2,432 people have been injured. Israel has conducted heavy strikes on Hezbollah targets, called for widespread evacuations and expanded its presence on the ground. The situation remains tense, with civilian populations facing displacement and damage to infrastructure. Authorities continue to track casualties and provide emergency assistance to those affected. Joining us to discuss the second major front in the Middle East right now is Nirmal Abraham, a political analyst, joining us live from Kochi in India. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a great pleasure to discuss this with you. Thank you. Pleasure. In terms of the second main front in this conflict, what is going to see it de-escalate after we've seen visuals of buildings leveled in Beirut? We've seen Israeli ground offensives encroach further and further into Lebanon's south. As we've seen, of course, over the past year, constant strikes from the Israeli military, even post this ceasefire that was signed in November of 2024. How, if at all, are we going to see this de-escalate, or is this just going to further increase tensions as Iran continues its assault on Gulf neighbors?
I think at the moment it feels like it might go on for a while, because the aim of Israel right now is to weaken the proxy wings of Iran, one of which is Hezbollah, probably the strongest of them. And they understand from the attacks that they've received that Hezbollah hasn't weakened as much as they thought. And they've also been collaborating with the Lebanese government. They've requested the government to disarm Hezbollah. They've tried it in the past, but has failed. I mean, if you remember the Taif Agreement in 1989, the UN resolution in 2006, in 2024, there was another call for disarmament. But Hezbollah, unfortunately, is actually more powerful than the Lebanese military. So they won't back down because, just because the Lebanese government or military requests them to. So that's one. On the other side, if they don't back down, Israel won't back down either. And if judging from the history of Israel, we've seen it in the last 2.5 years in Gaza as well. They don't really mind the death toll. They don't mind the injuries. They don't mind the displacement. They don't mind the destruction of infrastructure. They keep going until they achieve their goal. And here the goal, I believe, because there is a ongoing war with Iran at the moment, and because they are receiving strikes and the other end, if in a scenario, if it goes ahead, they do not want any of the proxies to join the war on a full scale with Iran and cause disturbance to their cause. So they will try to completely decimate or eliminate Hezbollah, which I think is nearly impossible. But as long as that goes on, I think the conflict would go on, and we would unfortunately see more displacement and death.
Nirmal, we're seeing repeated Israeli tactics once again of levelling these buildings, huge high-rise, what seems to be civilian infrastructure inside the Lebanese capital, falling to the ground after the severe Israeli strikes on them. We now have a death toll reaching nearly 1,000 people since Hezbollah fired at Israel in response to the death of the Ayatollah on the 2nd of March. In terms of Israel's strategy here, what do you make of it? We're seeing some sort of repeated way forward of, as you've said, the death toll not really being considered when it comes to Israel's priorities.
Yeah, unfortunately, that has been the case, as we've seen in the last 2-3 years. But in terms of attacking civilian infrastructure from the initial phase, if you look at the attacks that has happened since, it has come down slightly, but that's, as long as the death numbers go up, that doesn't matter. But, whenever public places, like for instance, municipal areas or housing facilities or residential areas are attacked, it isn't just the death that matters here. I mean, displacement of over 800,000 people already within Lebanon. And remember, that's nearly 15 to 20% of their population. And there's also external displacement of close to 1.25 lakh. So that's big for a country like Lebanon, which is already in a deep financial crisis. And although their tourism and other aspects are relatively smaller compared to Gulf nations, it is also being affected. So it's sad. I mean, it's a sad state for the Lebanese people and the Lebanese government, but unfortunately, it is Hezbollah that keeps firing from the other end, and it is Hezbollah that Israel aims to attack. But as a collateral damage, as we've seen in Gaza, civilians are dying, infrastructure is being destroyed, and civilian areas are being attacked, which is something that only Israel will be able to explain.
Nirmal, stay with us. We're turning over to updates coming out of Saudi Arabia next. The right to act militarily against Iran is being reserved by the Saudis this morning after a shattering of trust was declared by the kingdom's foreign minister. In the harshest comments since the conflict began 3 weeks ago, Prince Faisal bin Farhan has accused Tehran of premeditated hostile actions following a series of Iranian ballistic missile strikes on Saudi territory. These attacks were launched by Iran in retaliation for an earlier strike on its South Pars gas field, for which Israel has been blamed. Regardless of the current escalation, it was stated by bin Farhan that a diplomatic path is still preferred by Riyadh. A stern warning has been issued that nothing will be able to re-establish trust if Iranian aggression is not stopped immediately. However, global energy markets remain on edge as oil prices continue to shoot even higher. Furthermore, Tehran has been urged to rein in its regional proxies to prevent the crisis from drawing in neighbouring states. Nirmal joins us once again. Are we getting closer and closer to these Gulf states hitting their red lines and taking direct action against the Iranians? We continue to see reports and also mainly user-generated content of these huge fires, these huge explosions coming out of these Gulf states. Are we getting closer and closer to maybe a Saudi retaliation, maybe a Qatari retaliation towards Iran?
Yeah, I mean, but I think it's almost like saying, are we getting closer and closer to using a nuclear weapon? Because if Saudi decides to retaliate, which I believe they still won't, that will almost take this war to a whole new level. Because at the moment, even without the Gulf countries retaliating, only defending their territory, we've seen oil prices go up, Strait of Hormuz being disrupted, many countries, including India, where I'm from, being affected in terms of LPG crisis and oil prices. So if Saudi retaliates, it is going to get really worse, because one of the reasons I believe so, it's because we know the enmity that exists between Saudi and Iran for a long time. Also, Saudi is bordered by Iraq and Yemen, both of which are countries that have Iran militias. There are Shia militias Iraq, there are the Houthis in Yemen. So if Saudi retaliates, they know that the cost involved is really high, especially if you look at what Saudi, or the shift that Saudi has taken since, say, 2019, right before COVID. They have now planned, they've planned the Vision 2030. All of these projects are getting delayed. And the tourism is getting impacted, stock market, whatnot. I mean, you can name it, everything is getting affected. But if they get involved, this is going to go 2x or 3x. People will not, the projects will not only get delayed, it might get totally disrupted if they decide to go. And if people die, that's a whole different scenario. So I don't think even at this stage, countries like Saudi or Qatar would retaliate. They will try to be as diplomatic as possible and hope for the war to end. But at the moment, it doesn't look like it. It doesn't look like the war would end. As their pressure strategy, Iran might continue doing the same.
Okay, Nirmal, stay with us. I've just been informed that we have those sound bites coming in from Prince Faisal bin Farman. Let's take a listen to them.
I think that's the clearest signal of how Iran feels about diplomacy. It doesn't believe in talking to its neighbors. It tries to pressure its neighbors. And what I can say categorically, that's not going to work. The kingdom is not going to succumb to pressure. On the contrary, this pressure will backfire. Will backfire politically, will backfire, I believe, morally, and certainly, as we have stated quite clearly, we have reserved the right to take military actions if deemed necessary. And if the time comes, the leadership of the kingdom will take the necessary decision. I've not had a long enough diplomatic career to have experienced such a blatant attempt at blackmail as firing missiles while a diplomatic gathering is taking place. If Iran doesn't stop, that is the mood also I heard in this room earlier, immediately, I think there will be almost nothing that can re-establish that trust.
Nimral joins us once again. When Riyadh says it is reserving the right to act, how seriously should the region interpret that?
I think judging from his words, it looks like, again, he's being diplomatic. He says that there is a breach of trust. I don't think, again, at least in my opinion, it doesn't look like Saudi will retaliate. They're giving warnings again and again, just like Qatar and the other countries have. So I don't think it will translate into action unless something dramatic happens, because so far it is only the infrastructure that has been affected, including the oil infrastructure. People, I guess there are 2 deaths, unfortunately, and a few people, less than 10 people getting injured. But if that turns around, if people die at a large scale, or if a residential area is hit and people die at a large scale, things would change. But until, but I don't think Iran's cause isn't, Iran's cause is not to create death; it is to create disturbance in the life of people and for the economy that they're already doing. Because Saudi, as you know, is one of the greatest producers of oil. 20% of their exports have come down. Each interception that they make to these attacks costs nearly $3 to $4 million US. So that's affecting them. So that's what disturbs Saudi. It isn't the fact that they're being attacked. They understand that it's a pressure tactic. They understand that they're not trying to attack or kill civilians, but it's affecting them more economically than we think, including tourism and Vision 2030, because Vision 2030 was Saudi's aim and pathway to becoming the superpower of the Middle East, creating more job opportunities, attracting more FDI, bringing in more money. So that is also getting delayed. So I think it's more economic than we think. And also from Iran's perspective, their aim, I believe, is to create disturbance, not death or destruction.
Okay, Nirmal, stay with us. We're turning over to some statements coming out of the US next. Vice President J.D. Vance has warned Americans that they will face a rough road in the coming weeks. He said the economy and energy markets are under pressure due to the ongoing conflict with Iran. Fuel costs are rising and markets are reacting to escalating tensions in the Middle East. Vance emphasized that the challenges are expected to be temporary, but cautioned citizens to prepare. He made the remarks during a press event in Michigan, addressing concerns about short-term economic impacts. Let's listen.
But we recognize this is an issue, we are fighting against it, and we promise that when this conflict draws to a close, when this operation draws to a close, we're going to see those energy prices come back down to reality, because that's what the president promised to do. He delivered an energy-dominant agenda. It's made us much more secure in the face of these things. But yeah, we've got a rough road ahead of us for the next few weeks, but it's temporary.
Joining us on this discussion is Surinder Singh Lali, a foreign affairs expert, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us. It's always a great pleasure to speak to you. J.D. Vance there with some statements attempting to reassure the American people that these economic implications are going to merely be temporary and only last a few weeks. Given that this war is already extremely unpopular with the American people and around the world, in pretty much all countries apart from inside Israel, how is this likely to impact the Trump administration, the Republicans, the GOP, going into those November midterm elections?
Thank you, Thomas. It's such a pleasure and honor for me to be here. And I'm a little confused, Thomas. I don't know which bit of J.D. Vance should I be listening to. J.D. Vance was on record saying that, we shouldn't get into this war and Iran would be a big mistake. And now that he's become the vice president, he's taking a different tone. I don't know. I mean, as they say that when you get into a hole, you need to stop digging. So Donald Trump is on record saying that he didn't expect Iran to give this much and that kind of resistance that the GCC is involved in the whole thing. And now, not only have they gotten themselves into a hole, the Americans, now they also want the Europeans to bring their shovels and start digging deeper. Obviously, the Europeans have made it very simple, not my monkey, not my circus. So this is yet to hit rock bottom. Now, your question is, the midterms are, I don't think one needs to be a rocket scientist to know, because now it started hitting the American people. Inflation, tariffs, ICE, and expensive pardons, and the U-turn. And especially the honorable president of the United States came into power saying affordability, and we don't want to go into foreign wars, and he's doing the both. And the gasoline is already going up, and the way they've started now attacking the oil and the other installations, infrastructure, I mean, this has to even go more higher. So it's going to be very tough, not only for the midterm, but I think even before that. If you see now, the entire world is getting involved into it. And if Americans want to put boots on the ground, which they probably are going to, with more body bags, God forbid, coming back to the United States, because, the Strait of Hormuz is not that simple. I mean, in that 32 kilometers, it's only the 2-kilometer passage. And with the sort of pinprick, way of war, Iran can really do harm with just a small speedboat to these billion-dollar vessels. And who wants to risk their own vessel? I mean, a lot of insurance companies also wouldn't cover their up, and there are 1,000 vessels waiting on each side of the canal. So it's going to get far more complicated. And unfortunately, the way the state of Israel is also started attacking with impunity. Lebanon said they've just killed 900 people. And, it's ironical that the president of the United States, with such a large economy, just said that the state of Israel attacked the South Pars gas without my consent or opinion.
Yeah.
So this is, the whole thing is getting so fluid. And, it's not even the dog wagging the tail, it's the tail wagging the dog. So I'm really scared as an Indian too, because this is spiraling out and the whole world can get more affected by it. I mean, firstly through, the NATO countries and the allies under the bus, and now the GCC countries are worried for their survival. They didn't want to get into this war, but now Saudi Arabia says and the UAE says we'll have to attack Iran. So it's very unfortunate, that they didn't want to get into this war. They were not asked to. Peace negotiation in Oman was on the way, and then suddenly J.D. Vance says that because Israel was going to attack and we've attacked. So it's all gotten it's all become a kabuki circus, Thomas.
Yeah. Surinder, do stay with us. We're turning over to our next story, heading directly over to Iran. But first, we have some breaking news where the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has criticised French President Emmanuel Macron for not condemning the US-Israel war on Iran. He said that Macron remained silent when Israel struck fuel storage facilities in Tehran, exposing millions to toxins. Araghchi added that Macron's current statement only came after Iran's retaliation and not after Israel's attacks on gas facilities. He called the situation sad, highlighting what he described as a lack of consistent condemnation of aggression against Iran. The comments come following Macron's call for a moratorium on strikes targeting civilian infrastructure in Iran and in Qatar. What do you make of the statements there coming out of the Iranian foreign minister? Foreign leaders, of course, and France, a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, and a strong defender of international law. Of course, lots of the US's Western allies have been under a lot of criticism since not condemning Washington after its alleged breaks of international law under the second Trump administration, whether that be the capture of Maduro or this conflict. Do you think the Iranian foreign minister has a point?
You know, I don't know who has a point, or none of them are, kosher here. It's just that the way Donald Trump, probably after his, Netflix kind of success from Venezuela, thought that, he could take care of Iran also, and that obviously hasn't happened. I mean, at least in Venezuela, that Delcy Rodriguez, the second line, the underboss who they got. And we don't know how good that is, but we leave that for a different day, for a different discussion. But Iran is a theocratic dictatorship. I mean, a lot of these people would much rather die. And let me tell you, I mean, even before this war started, the number of people, and for rightful reasons, who hated the Ayatollah Khomeini and this kind of regime are now probably have more hatred for the state of Israel and for the United States. Because if you start attacking the oil installations, the water installations, what choice are you giving to the middle class of Iran, who thought help was on their way? That's what Donald Trump said. And suddenly now, who do they fight? The IRGC, who's on record saying that we have our hand on the trigger. So I feel really, really sad even for the Iranian people, because from the frying pan and into the fire, they're stuck in the middle. And so is the position of Europe. I mean, Europeans, even if they don't want to get involved, maybe now they might have to get involved in some way or the other, because it's getting too, I mean, everybody's getting impacted. Inflation is going to hit in every country, and the biggest problem with every European leader would be that American stock right now in every country across the world, including Europe, is so low that any European or any leader in the world who tries to, sort of appear to be tilting towards Donald Trump would have his political career come to an end. The world is so polarized, and it is all becoming a free fall. And unfortunately, for a lot of people who don't want to get involved into it, might get involved into it, which will affect their domestic politics. And please understand, in Europe, each country has, people from certain countries which can get involved into sectarian violence too. So this the fire can even go into the Europeans' home constituencies. I mean, Sweden, France, England, they do have a lot of people from Shia and Sunni sect. So this can become, the whole world is going to probably become a fireball if the Americans don't take an off-ramp and find a solution to it, which seems unlikely to it, because, as they say, when it hits the fan, Thomas.
No, it's interesting. We'll keep tabs on those developments. Do stay with us one final time, Surinder. We have some updates coming out of Iran, where the execution of 3 men have been carried out by Iranian authorities in the religious city of Qom this morning. The individuals were convicted of killing 2 police officers during a wave of nationwide unrest that began on January the 8th. According to reports, the death sentences were upheld by the Supreme Court following charges of murder and waging war against God. Furthermore, the men were accused of acting in favor of foreign adversaries, specifically Israel and the US. Regardless of international calls for restraint, the judiciary confirmed that the executions proceeded following the biggest crackdown in the Islamic Republic's history. Meanwhile, Iranian officials have continued to blame external involvements for the protests that have gripped the country this year. The use of knives and other weapons were cited by the court as the primary evidence for the capital convictions. Furthermore, the regional climate remains tense as Tehran links internal dissent directly to the ongoing war with Israel. Surender Lali joins us once again. Many international actors call Iran for restraint when it comes to carrying out these executions. We know that it's going through an internet blackout right now. What does it say about the current atmosphere inside the Islamic Republic that these executions are indeed going ahead?
Thomas, my heart bleeds for the people of Iran because my father was born in Iran and so was my grandfather. So I understand the pain that, the Iranians have been going through, and unfortunately, it is getting worse by the day. They're stuck in between the RGC and the so-called help coming from the United States of America. And with the impunity with which the state of Israel is going out and bombing, is going to put the population even in a tighter spot. I mean, when you have black rain, when you don't have electricity, when you don't have access to water, I mean, these people are going to turn more against the Western economies who, in the name of liberating them, came to their shores. I mean, Joe Kent, the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, he's an American. He was on record saying yesterday when he resigned that, this is not what I signed up for. The United States of America is operating under Israeli pressure. Marjorie Taylor Greene has been going all over the 50 states of America for the last month and a half saying that, there is not a congressman or a congresswoman who is not funded by AIPAC, which is the Jewish lobby. Tulsi Gabbard also yesterday, if you see, she also did a Christine Ohm. She said that, I don't know, but please understand the buck stops at the President of the United States of America. So if you see now, his MAGA coalition is also falling apart because they also said that this is not what we signed up for. A president who stood for affordability and not going out to fight other wars is now sending troops on the ground. So not only in the United States or in Iran, even in the United States, it's such a divided house because if you see now, it's purely between, even in MAGA, there is one Republican MAGA and there is one, Donald Trump's MAGA. So as you said in the first part that I don't see anything promising, at least in the midterms that are going to come. They're definitely losing the House for sure, because now that tariff-inflicted inflation is hitting every individual, a MAGA or a non-MAGA, a Republican or a Democrat. And even with the Strait of Hormuz being blocked, all the fertilizers are stopped. So now the farming lobby, which is so huge in America, which is mainly in the red states, is also going to get affected because when the fertilizers don't come, it doesn't work. So they're going to be more unhappy too. So Donald Trump is definitely, stirred the hornet's nest, and every passing day you see there's somebody part of his team saying that this is not kind of war, and it's hitting a rock bottom, Thomas.
Yes. Surender Singh Lali, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. It's been a great pleasure having you here to discuss these issues. We turn now to the United States once again, and former U.S. National Counterterrorism Center Director Joe Kent spoke publicly for the first time since resigning in an extensive interview with Tucker Carlson. Kent said key decision makers were blocked from expressing their opinions to President Trump before strikes on Iran, limiting the intelligence community's sanity check. He added that there was no intelligence indicating Iran planned a big sneak attack like 9/11 or Pearl Harbor, and that Iran's late supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, had been moderating the country's nuclear program. Kent claimed Israel pulled the US into the conflict, saying the imminent threat cited by US officials was actually from Israel. Kent said he spoke directly with Trump before resigning, describing the conversation as respectful and saying that they departed on good terms. Russia has confirmed that the trilateral peace talks with the US and Ukraine aimed at ending the war have been paused due to the escalating conflict in Iran, says the Kremlin spokesperson. Peskov also said that the Russian presidential envoy Kirill Dmitriev will continue to work on economic cooperation, but formal negotiations among the three sides are on hold. Ukrainian and Western officials have not confirmed a new timeline for resumption, and tensions remain high over territorial and security disputes. Some news from the tech world now, and a Meta AI agent went rogue inside the tech giant and exposed sensitive company and user data to employees who do not have permission to access it. As per a report by The Information cited by TechChurch, reportedly the incident occurred after a Meta employee posted on an internal forum asking for help with a technical question, which is a standard practice inside the company. However, another engineer is said to have summoned an AI agent to help analyze the question and posted a response without asking the engineer for permission to share it. Meta reportedly confirmed the validity of the incident to The Information. The company is said to have given a SEV 1 rating to the incident, which is the second highest level of severity in the tech giant's internal system for measuring security issues. Well, that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Iran says Israel targeted its South Pars gas field and responded with missile fire across the Gulf, including strikes towards Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Qatar Energy confirmed significant damage at Ras Laffan, while Riyadh reports intercepting incoming projectiles aimed at strategic sites. The UAE has halted operations at its Habshan gas facility following an Iranian strike, while Saudi Arabia says multiple refining sites were targeted. Riyadh states confidence in Tehran has collapsed as the conflict spreads into vital energy sectors. Israel targets Iranian naval assets in Bandar Anzali alongside strikes on South Pars gas field, signaling a sharp escalation in the conflict. President Masoud Pezeshkian warns the actions could spark uncontrollable consequences with global repercussions. Iranian missile attacks have left 4 people dead in Tel Aviv and the occupied West Bank, according to reports. The incident underlines a worsening human toll, with non-combatant losses rising as fighting intensifies. Israel's military says it will continue targeted operations against senior Iranian figures after claiming to have killed Intelligence Minister Ismail Khatib. The announcement points to a broader strategy aimed at weakening Iran's leadership structure. Israel has intensified airstrikes on Beirut, killing at least 10 people and leveling a multi-story building near the city center. It also says crossings over the Litani River are being targeted to hinder Hezbollah mobility as the war deepens. In other news, Britain is launching a meningitis vaccination drive in southeast England after a deadly surge that has claimed 2 lives and left at least 20 infected. Officials say most cases involve young people and are connected to the Men-B variant. Heavy social media use is associated with falling well-being among young people, particularly girls, in some English-speaking countries, a global study finds. Authorities are considering restrictions, with Australia already introducing a ban for under-16s. Those are your headlines for the hour. We start, of course, in the Middle East for our first update, and the first Palestinian fatalities of the ongoing Middle East war have been confirmed after 4 women were killed by falling shrapnel in the occupied West Bank. The deaths occurred in the town of Beit Awa near Hebron, where missile fragments struck a local beauty salon during